Hey, Aegis girl, how are you? Okay, so it's just you and me. Um, anyway, people are probably not used to me being on at this time, but I couldn't read. I couldn't finish reading last night. I was literally falling asleep sitting up. I just had. It was. I've never really. I don't think I've ever done that before. Just said I can't do this anymore. I have to go to sleep. But then I was up really early. I was thinking about the decoupage, and I've been decoupaging for like the last hour and a half. And then I said, you know what? I'm up early, really early to do this. Maybe I'll do this because I have time before the 3 o'clock thing. So I'll hear. So we'll see who's here. Maybe there's different people here. I don't know. Hi, Rosalita Marie. Hi, Deborah Sizos. Hi, Chelsea. Hi, Diane Ellis. Okay, so what I'm going to do is read through this transcript of this interview and then, discuss it along the way, or her bizarre behavior and crazy things she's doing. Okay, so let me just get that up, which I have right over here. Close off some of my windows. Hope everybody's doing okay. If you're going to join us at 3, Sandra Rusak's going to be here showing how to do the finger knitting. So, okay, so this is in the police interrogation room, and Jodi is handcuffed with her hands behind her back, sitting on a chair with her head and upper body laid across the round table. She gets up from the chair. She sits on the floor with her back against the wall. She shoves the chair away with her feet, and then she bends at the waist and quickly raises her head and flips her hair from front of her head to the back. Still sitting on the floor with her back to the wall, she stretches her legs out in front of her. She remains sitting on the floor until approximately 2:40. Then you have a female officer that enters the room. Jodi will ask a question. It's not able to be heard. And then the female officer says, "Can I get you to have a seat here?" Jodi gets up and sits in the seat. And then the female officer says, "I'll be right in." And Jodi says, "Can you take the handcuffs off?" Female officer says, "What's that?" Jodi Arias says, "Can you take the handcuffs off?" Female officer says, "As soon as the detective gets in here, Detective Flores, he can take those off for you. I think that's what he told you anyway, that he would allow you to have your handcuffs off." And then she leaves the room, the female officer. Jodi lays her head, upper body, and back on the table. Then she sits up. She talks and whispers to herself and says, "It's really cold in here." She lays her head and upper body back on the table. Then Detective Flores comes in, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to get those off you," which you're going to see over here. "Okay, can you stand up for me? Face the other way. I'm going to get you a bottle of water, okay?" Jodi says, "Thank you. Any chance you can get my purse?" Detective Flores says, "Yeah, we'll get that from the house." Jodi says, "Will they bring it to me?" Detective Flores says, "It will probably be put in your property. Here's the water for you. Do you want..." Oh, the female officer says to Detective Flores, "Do you want one for yourself?" Yeah, he says. Jodi says, "Any way you could turn up the heat in here, or do you have a sweater I could borrow or something?" Female officer says, "I don't have any sweaters. I'll see if I can turn it up. It's hard to control the heat in this building." Jodi says, "That's fine." Detective Flores says, "Sure don't bottle myself in here so you remember me." Now, I don't know what that is. Bottle myself. Okay, but sometimes the transcripts are messed up. "Of course I do." Detective Flores says, "I traveled all the way up here to talk to you because, I've been working on Travis's case ever since it happened, okay? And I know exactly when it happened, when he was killed, and a lot of details, and just recently we found quite a bit of evidence, and I'll discuss that with you. The main thing that I'm looking for, though, is answers on why certain things happened, why they went so far, and also to get your statements." "Okay," she says. Detective Flores says, like a lot of details on this case that haven't been released to the public and not even to Travis's family. And those details are known only by us and the person who did it, okay? And that's one of the reasons I'm here, because I believe you know some of those details, and I think you can help us. Jodi says, I would love to help you in any way that I can. Detective Flores says, okay, because we're here at the police department, the sheriff's department here, in it's Siskiyou County? She says, Siskiyou. This is called... Okay, this is Detective Flores. And you're considered under arrest or detained. You're not free to go, and I'm the police officer, and I have to read you your rights, okay? I'm sure you've heard them on TV. You know, I have to read them off this little card here, but they're pretty much the same, but I'll explain them to you as we go, okay? Jodi says, okay. Detective Flores says, let's see. This is July 15th, 2008, correct? Yes, Jodi says. Detective Flores says, let's see what time it is. It's 10:01. Detective Flores says, this is case number 2008-161-0844. Okay, you do have the right to remain silent, okay? Anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to the presence of an attorney to assist you prior to questioning and to be with you during questioning, if you so desire. If you cannot afford an attorney, you have the right to have an attorney appointed for you prior to questioning. Do you understand these rights? Jodi says, yes. Detective Flores says, and what I'm going to do is ask you some questions. Ask you what you've been doing, you know, certain dates, what you were up to. Jodi says, yeah. Detective Flores says, you mentioned you were traveling on some of these dates. She says, I travel too. Detective Flores says, I want to kind of clarify some of these things. And you know, if there's a question that you don't know, you don't want to answer, you don't feel comfortable, you can say no, you know, or you can elaborate as much as you want. It's completely up to you. It's at your speed. I don't want to pressure you. Jodi says, is this recorded at all, or should we... As she says this, she turns her body towards the corner table and picks up 2 recorders and moves them, puts them on the table in front of Detective Flores. Detective Flores says, I don't know if there's a recording or not. Jodi says, I don't know if these are voice recorders. I noticed them. I don't know if they have video or audio or batteries or what. Detective Flores says, I don't think they're on. Jodi says something that can't be heard. And then Detective Flores says, that's okay. Yeah, I haven't even touched those or anything, but, Jodi says, oh, okay. And she's still examining these recorders. Detective Flores says, they are not on. Jodi turns around and puts them back on the corner table. Detective Flores says, what I want to do is get to the bottom of it. Everybody wants to know, okay? And I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can voluntarily answer them if you want, okay? Is that cool? Jodi says, yeah, that's fine. Detective Flores sighs and says, there was some question about you being, well, let's start with this. What have you been up to since Travis's death? What have you been doing? Jodi, well, I've been working. I haven't been really working at Prepaid Legal. There's not a whole lot here in the marketplace, which is... Detective Flores says it's kind of a small area. Jodi says, it's small here and really could be seen as an opportunity rather than a hindrance, because that's just means the market is untapped in a large way. So I could have if I wanted to, but I'm kind of like a deer in the headlights when it comes to Prepaid Legal, and I just kind of have a fear of approaching people. I've been working at a Mexican restaurant on the north end of town. It's been kind of a daze, at least for the first few weeks. Detective Flores says, like everybody you know? Jodi says, yeah, I know a lot of people who have been posting on Facebook really nice things, you know, in memories. And at one point I was like, maybe I should do that. So I posted this thing and I just said all my memories. And I realized looking back on it that it kind of sounded immature, because it's more of like my Dear Travis kind of letter. And so I took it down because Detective Flores is more personal. Jodi says, yeah, some of it was. And you can't really make out what she says because Detective Flores coughs and clears his throat. She says, not too personal, nothing inappropriate, just I just felt funny. I think I'm a photographer. I tend to communicate more through pictures, so I posted a ton of pictures that I had of him. And I have a ton more, but I can't access them right now, and videos and things that I know his family would want. But so I posted pictures and I took that down. I posted something last week, but other than that, I've been on Facebook and MySpace a lot, looking at his profile, looking at his pictures, reading things about his obituary and any news updates. You know, there's legacy.com where you can write something about him. I just want to make sure that everything is good. You guys are all good. You can all hear. Okay, good. Just want to make sure because go back here. So then Detective Flores says, yeah. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, I've seen a lot of those postings. Jodi says, I didn't realize until I actually spoke with Ryan Burns. He's that guy in Utah. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, and we've been talking a lot. We try not to talk about that because it's kind of like, ugh. And plus, Travis is my ex-boyfriend, but at the same time, he's my friend. So while I'm mourning my friend, how do you talk to your new potential, possibly, maybe person that you might start dating about your friend, even though he's your ex-boyfriend? So it's kind of a gray area. I try not to talk about him too much, but he comes up a lot. And it was through him that I learned that he said, you know, if you come out to Utah, things are really weird because everyone thinks that you could have had a hand in this. Detective Flores says, I've talked to a lot of people and everybody's pointing the finger at you. Jodi says, I know. Detective Flores says, you know, everyone is saying, I don't understand what happened to Travis. I don't know who killed him, but you need to look at Jodi. And sometimes the simplest answers are the correct ones, and that's one of the reasons I started looking at you a little bit closer. And over the last month or so, I've gotten into Travis's life, talked to all of his friends, his family. I've got a really good understanding of who he is now, and I've got a very good understanding of your relationship with him, and I'm kind of just putting two and two together. Jodi says, well, I think too, and Detective Flores says, and it kind of matches. So one of the reasons I'm here to talk to you is to figure out what was going on between you two. What I know, the relationship that you guys had was of convenience sometimes. Obviously, you weren't boyfriend and girlfriend anymore. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, but you were still having a sexual relationship, which, Jodi says, does his family know about that? Just curious. Detective Flores says, no, his family doesn't know anything. Jodi says, okay, I'm interested in protecting how he's remembered as well. And, you know, Detective Flores says, well, I'm sure if Travis could speak right now, he wouldn't care what people thought about him because they knew who he was, okay? A sexual relationship here or there because of the fact he was a member of the church really doesn't matter. And Jodi says, a couple of times I asked him if Detective Flores says, a whole range of things. Jodi says, yeah, I think in the broad scope of things, that could be right. I just think the reason I care about that is because he was adamant about it. A couple of times we prayed about it. It didn't work, or we didn't stick it to our guns on it. One time a girlfriend of mine just said, why don't you just go to your bishop and talk and ask Travis the same? And I talked to him about that, and he got really angry. He said, I've already had problems with this in the past. I'm embarrassed by it. I don't want to go to my bishop. And so we just kind of stopped for like a few weeks. And then that must have been in, I think it was August. And then it just resumed. Detective Flores says, well, the way Travis, by getting into his head and everything, written in his journals and everything I found out about him, he truly had feelings for you. And for some reason, he felt that the relationship between you and him was somewhat unhealthy, but he couldn't stop it. And I assume it's probably maybe the same way you felt about him, or Jodi says, it's probably, Detective Flores says, maybe you didn't understand why he didn't believe it was healthy. Jodi says, no, I didn't. I think it was healthy. either spiritually at least, and probably emotionally, but most spiritually. And I think that kind of, once you have something like that, that's not healthy spiritually, it filters through all aspects of your life. It's one of the main, it's there 3 main reasons I moved back to Eureka. And one was I was in financial dire straits. I was not getting ahead. Things were not working. Everything in Arizona was like, except for the wonderful friends that I made in my ward, and the opportunity, it's like the Mormon land of opportunity there, which is awesome, but except for all that, like, every sign was pointing, just go, you know? I wasn't able to hold a job, and that never happened before. Just too much for me, and my nightlife was without him. He would text me and, hey, I'm getting sleepy, ... That was his code to, like, come on over kind of thing. Coast is clear, So, that was just, I live 5 minutes away, maybe 10, depending. And it was just too convenient and too easy, and it was fun, and we had fun, and we were together, and so it wasn't healthy, and I totally agree with that. So that was one of the, financially I wasn't doing well. I missed my family. I moved away shortly after high school. I came back to visit, but I realized over the years I missed out on a lot of things, and she starts to get real shaky here in her voice. My little brother and sister, I missed out on their karate or their baseball or their cheerleading or just whatever. And my dad's not doing well. He doesn't think he has very long to live, but he says that. He always says that. It's been that way for a decade, but he's still here, thank goodness. My grandparents aren't getting any younger, and I just have an awesome family, and I wanted to be able to just be here for a little bit and regroup. Financially, I owe my parents a lot of money. I owe my grandparents a lot of money, and I owe friends money, and I owe that guy that I bought a house with. I owe him a lot of money. He doesn't ask me for it, but I intend to pay him back because he really footed the bill on the mortgage for a few months. And the third reason, and I'd like to put this third because I like to think that second of those reasons I would have been strong enough somehow, but the third reason was to put distance, a physical distance between Travis and I, because I know that he really liked me, and he said he did. I kind of felt guilty. I know they weren't dating, but I just felt guilty somehow. I didn't know Ryan at the time. I met him in March in Oklahoma City. It was brief, and I remember seeing him and saying, oh, I really want to go say hi to him. But he was surrounded by people, and he was kind of unapproachable. He says that he remembers meeting me too, and it wasn't until Zion, my friend, texted me, and I think I told you that. Detective Flores says, and this was all after? Jodi says, this was all after. Detective Flores said, you had broken up? You broke up with Travis? Everything was over? She says, oh yeah, because part of the time when we broke, well, it was kind of a mutual thing, but I sort of more broke up with him, and it was hard to do because I really loved him, but I just realized that without trust, you can't have anything, and I had violated his trust. Detective Flores says, is that the main reason you guys broke up, is the trust issue? Jodi says, trust. I think that there's... Detective Flores says, not that this relationship was unhealthy because of sexual activity or promiscuity, but just that you guys couldn't trust each other? Jodi says, I think that, and this doesn't make it right, I think being a convert, I've had a couple of serious relationships before where I was intimate with a few people, and it's kind of silly, but I used to always joke that regardless of what the Bible says, and yes, I'm Christian, I just live my life by the 10 Commandments, and that's mine. Those are my rules, ... Thou shalt not this or that, but it doesn't say, and she whispers something. Then she says, thou shalt not fornicate, giggles. So I just used to joke about it. It's it's a bad philosophy. I think with Travis, there's a part of me that feels really guilty because there's something inside that thought, this is nice for instant gratification, but you're destroying what you could have had with Travis, and that's why we did pray about it. I remember we knelt by his bed once, and surprisingly, he suggested it. Normally, we would. I would suggest that we pray before we go on a trip or before we would eat before lunch. Detective Flores said it was kind of unusual for him, huh? Jodi says, yeah, because he was very resistant to prayer with me. I mean, I feel it might be because we were driving away the spirit constantly, or maybe he felt that by inviting the spirit, he would feel guilty about later on in the evening, or I don't know what the deal was, or the excuse he used, but was because I'm a convert, or I need more practice saying prayers. He was like, so I'd say, would you say a prayer? He's like, why don't you say a prayer? I'm like, why don't you say a prayer? Why don't you say a prayer? So we'd go back and forth. I don't know. It was just one time when I was on a trip to have a soup pie. We were all getting on the road, and I think it was with Dan Freeman and his sister Desiree, and they were all like, Jodi, will you say a prayer? And I said, sure. And Travis was like laughing. Anyway, I don't want to argue with them. So, what was I saying? Detective Flores says, well, he's, the whole trust issue keeps coming back into my mind. Jodi says, that was the big reason. Detective Flores says, he was a big time flirt, and that's the one thing everyone says about him. He flirts a lot. Does he mean anything by it? No, not really. That's just who he is. He did have, girlfriends here and there, and he was at a point in his life where he wanted things to really settle down. He felt like he needed to grow up. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, become a husband, become a father. The time had come, and he felt the time had come. He felt that the time had come and gone, and he was falling behind. Jodi says, he told me that too. He said he felt like his time was running out, and I told him that, despite the fact that he's not going to be in the singles ward very much longer, he still has a lot of options. He's still a very eligible bachelor, and he just didn't see it that way. He was like, you don't understand. That might be true, but my chances are severely reduced once I turn 31. It was like this ticking time bomb. Detective Flores says, Detective Flores says, well, finding a good Mormon girl, was difficult because in that church, most of the girls get married in their early 20s. Jodi says, yeah. Detective Flores says, Jodi says he said he didn't want to marry a girl in her early 20s because he said that he noticed a lot of patterns in the church with girls that marry between 19 and 24, so to speak. They'd start having babies and growing their family, and then they would look at their single girlfriends who were still having fun with no responsibilities, and they would regret getting married. And I think if you're strong in the church, it's not so much a problem, but Detective Flores says, depending on who you surround yourself with, too. If you surround yourself with the right people, it's a different story. But, that's who he was, and did you guys ever possibly discuss getting married or anything? Jodi says, well, when we were dating, we did. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, once we broke up, he broke it off. He actually proposed to me a lot of times, but he wasn't serious. I think he was serious once, and it was when we broke up, and that was really hard because we were on the phone, and it was like none of that stuff should have been done on the phone anyway, but I was like hundreds of miles away, and I told him that I loved him. We didn't say I love you during our relationship, but we said it afterwards. It was weird. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, I said, this isn't, breaking up with him on the phone wasn't really the way I wanted to do it, but it was kind of a situation that had come to a point where it just couldn't be ignored anymore. Detective Flores says, let's move to after the breakup. Jodi says, okay. Detective Flores says, what kept you in Mesa at that point? Jodi says, I actually moved to Mesa a few weeks after we broke up. Really, says Detective Flores. Jodi says, I meant as far as the timeline goes, and if you want to call it an official breakup, shortly thereafter, it's like we were seeing each other. Detective Flores says, so you guys were seeing each other, but it was a long-distance type relationship? Jodi says, it was always a long-distance relationship. When we were officially dating, we dated from about the beginning of February to the end of June. So February, March, April, May, June, about 5 months total. Detective Flores says, okay. And then in June of 2007, you guys broke up, and she says June 29th. And Detective Flores says, and then you moved to Mesa? Jodi says, yeah, I moved to Mesa, sort of. Detective Flores says, most people, when they break up, they kind of go their own way. Jodi says, I know. And plans were already in order for me to move there. I was already speaking with a friend who was, I was going to be her roommate, and I was her roommate for a short time. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, she was kind of flighty, but she's a great girl. I had talked to Travis about maybe going to Southern California instead. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, and he's really persuasive. Detective Flores said, did he persuade you to stay there in Mesa? Jodi said, he kind of was playing up all the advantages if I did come to Mesa. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, and if I did, he said, it's a great place. We can still see each other and hang out on occasion. His church is very strong and you'll make a lot of friends. And I already knew all this stuff prior because we had talked about that. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, and so I went ahead and I just made the move. It sounded at the time like a good idea. Detective Flores says, and you guys continued to kind of see each other at that time? Jodi says, yeah. At the time, I was sort of living across town over by Greenfield. Do you know where that is? Detective Flores says, okay, yeah. She says, it was at Greenfield near Broadway. Greenfield and Broadway were the nearest cross streets, and that's where the girl who I was originally talking with, I moved in with her. Detective Flores says, that's kind of far from... Jodi says, yeah. Detective Flores says, Travis's place. Jodi says, the thing about her, and I just want to give you a background of why I moved suddenly. She approached me the weekend after I got there and said, hey. She knocked on the door and said, can I talk to you for a second? And I said, sure. And she moved in with her boyfriend, and they were engaged. Okay. And then she said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that Scott and I went to Vegas last week and tied the knot. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah. We haven't told anyone, but we didn't want to live in sin. And she had already been sealed in the temple and was waiting for her cancel. So they were going to have a civil wedding on a beach in Oregon, and they did the following weekend. She told me on a Monday or Tuesday, it was the beginning of the week. She said, the reason I'm telling you is because I'm getting married this weekend and I have to go out of town a few days ahead of Scott, to make arrangements. And now that he's a married man, we don't feel that it's right that you were here in the house. She was like, I don't want to inconvenience you, but is there any way that you can stay with someone else or just find another place? At the time, I was waiting on a house in Gilbert because I already knew they were getting married, so I was kind of looking anyway. And there was this great girl named Brenda, and she was waiting on her keys for the mortgage to go through. And it was a great ward, it was a great house, and they were planning construction and all that. It was really nice, but she didn't get her keys for months and months. I think she's in the house now, but I don't know. I haven't talked to her, so I scrambled. I went to the Institute. I wrote down a bunch of phone numbers. I called them all, got voicemails. One girl that answered, her name was Tiffany, and she knew Travis, and she was at his services in Arizona and as well. And we've just remained friends, sort of like on MySpace and Facebook and that kind of thing. And she said, hey, sorry, that's an updated posting. I forgot to take it down. Go to this website. So ldshousing.net, I went there. I made 3 phone calls for the places that were within my price range. I didn't think to look where they were. The one girl that called me back, her name was Shannon Derricott. She said, here's my place, here's the directions, go ahead and go out and come see the house. It's available, so we did. Go ahead, Detective Flores says. Do you have to get that? No. Okay, so I moved out there, and when Travis found out it was so close to him, he freaked out about it. And I made sure to check that it wasn't that we wouldn't be in the same ward, and it was within his ward boundaries, but it was also within another single ward boundary. So of course I'm going to go to the other one because it would just be kind of weird. I mean, I didn't want to know about him and Lisa at first. Detective Flores says. Jodi says, so I don't know if they were even dating at that time. I don't know what their whole timeline was, but it still would have been weird, and it wouldn't have made Travis very... Detective Flores says, during that time he was seeing Lisa, did you continue to see him as well? Jodi says, yeah, and I didn't know that he was seeing her. Detective Flores says, okay, but he would call you and have you come over? Yeah, Jodi says. Detective Flores says, I know there was a time when you, I guess, were cleaning his house, too, for extra money or something he hired you? Jodi says, yeah, I did that, 'cause he knew that I was struggling, and he's like, I've been doing the math, and that happened pretty much right on. That started in August, and he's like, I've done the math, and I feel that I can be more productive. My time is more valuable than X amount of dollars per hour. So why don't I pay you this per hour, and I'll work, and you can make a little bit of money? Detective Flores says, okay, that makes sense. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, so that was around the same time frame as the move and back and forth? And Jodi says, it was like a few weeks after the move. I was still living with Rachel over on Greenfield. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, when that started, and he sent me this picture, and he's like, this is your uniform. Have it by Friday, Thursday, or whatever. And it was this French maid thing, and I was like, no. Detective Flores laughs and says, yeah, that's him. Typical. Like I said, he's a very flirty guy. Jodi says, he is. Then Detective Flores says, not obviously the Rachel, or Jodi says, Lisa? Detective Flores says, Lisa relationship didn't work out, and in time period he really wasn't seeing anyone, and then Mimi came into the picture. What did you think about her? And Jodi says, I didn't know a lot about her. She seems like a really nice girl. He showed me her picture on Facebook, you know. I don't think she had a lot of pictures on there. He said that he's not sure why, but he's pretty sure that she could be it. Detective Flores said, Jodi says, and I was happy for him. I didn't find out about Lisa. Detective Flores says, the conversation you had face-to-face with him, or this conversation you had face-to-face with him, or... She says, yeah, it was in his room. And he had his laptop. It was on his bed. And I didn't find out about Lisa until after we broke up. We had this conversation where we decided to all just come clean. And you know, this was quite a conversation because I was never unfaithful. But when we started dating that timeline around February, the reason I remember February, he had told me in December, you know, go date other people kind of thing. And so I did. So January 10th, I went on a date with my friend John for lunch, and we just kind of, you know, had sushi. Nothing romantic happened. We didn't hold hands. We didn't kiss. I think we hugged. I guess it was considered a date because he asked me and I accepted and he paid for it. That was in Pasadena. Detective Flores says, yeah, he pays for it. It's a date. Jodi says, yeah, that was in Pasadena, and the following evening I went out with my friend Abe, and he drinks. He's got like a Mark, I think was his drink. I got cranberry juice, and we just talked forever. He talked about politics, which is, Detective Flores says, are all these guys in the Marine Corps or something? Jodi says, they're both in prepaid legal. John Dixon is not in prepaid legal anymore. He's moved on to other ventures. Detective Flores says, no, but the Marine Corps. Are they in the service at all? Jodi says, no. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, Abe is he's a little bit older. He's just sort of a businessman. He has a background in, I don't remember, production or something. And Detective Flores says, this is the time that you guys were broken up or still kind of going out. Jodi says, I'm sorry, this is before we started dating. The reason I say this because he told me a few times, he told me during that conversation too, that he's like, you seem to have a very convenient timeline for when we started dating. I used to ask him, when did we actually start dating? Because I figured if we ever made it to a year, we might as well celebrate him. And he's like, I'm not really sure. And the reason I think it was February 2nd is because do you know if Chris and Sky use? Detective Flores says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, okay. I used to spend a lot of time at their house, and, they're a wonderful family, and she's someone who I really opened up to. And, I told her a little bit about how I just wasn't sure. I got Travis at the time, and I wasn't sure what was going on there. And she wrote in this long letter, or she didn't write a letter. Travis wrote the letter, but she kind of got on his case, and they told me all kinds of things about Travis and that I wasn't aware of. Detective Flores says, what kind of stuff are you talking about? Jodi says, they said if I don't get away from Travis, I'm going to become just like Deanna, which is his ex-girlfriend. Do you want to waste 6 years of your life waiting for him? And Detective Flores says, because he can't commit? Jodi says, he still tells Deanna, I love you, and I'll say, what? And, and that kind of thing. Detective Flores says, yeah, and I truly believe he still does love her, but Jodi says, oh, he does. Detective Flores says, Travis, he's what you call a player. You know what that means. He's kind of, Jodi says, he doesn't intend to hurt anyone, though. Detective Flores says he pulls the girls in, but he can't make a commitment. He portrays himself to be a certain way, but he's really not. He portrays himself to have a lot of money. He's not. Jodi laughs and says he's got a lot of things. He told me the first night that I met him, or was it the second night? It was at the MGM Grand. He invited me to this executive director banquet, and he was kind of talking about what his earnings were in the last year and how he made almost made his 6 figures and that sort of thing. And he leans in and he goes, in this business, you have to show off your money a little bit. And in prepaid legal, it is. People want to see that you're actually being successful. So, he's done a good job at that. Detective Flores says, it's about making money. Jodi says, yeah. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so Chris and Sky were just, by the end of the conversation, they started calling me Deanna, and I was just shocked. I didn't want to. That's the last thing I wanted. Detective Flores says, how do you feel about that? Jodi says, my biggest concern was losing respect in their eyes because I really, really kind of looked up to them, and I would have laughed it off, and I thought it was kind of funny, but I feared inside that I was losing their respect. So I talked to them. When I talked to them next, I was like, what do I do? What do I say? And he ended up writing this long, long letter to Sky saying, I just got off the phone with a very reluctant to talk to me, Jodi, and she wrote back saying something to the effect, I wouldn't want my sister to date you. Detective Flores says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, why do you kiss Jodi in the dark and then act like you guys aren't even together in the daytime? Things like that. Detective Flores says, that's a good statement because that kind of sums up the relationship that you had with him. It seems like, Jodi says, especially, Detective Flores says, he liked you. He loved you. He wanted to be with you, but he was reluctant to make a commitment first off, and truly he didn't think you were marriage material, and I don't know why not. I mean, I see you. You're a wonderful girl, and you're struggling. You're trying to make your way through life, and I don't see why you guys couldn't have made it, Jodi says, I think we have very many different philosophies in a lot of ways. We would argue about the dumbest things, and he would want me to admit that he was right, and I would happily do it, but Detective Flores says, that's a man's thing. Jodi says, and I should have just known better and admitted it. I eventually learned how to argue with Travis, and Detective Flores says, talk to my wife. Okay, fine, you're right. Jodi Arias says, yeah, eventually that's what I began to do with him. It's like the more I just agree with him, the sooner the arguments gets over, and the sooner we can make up, and the makeup was always great. But there were so many times I just couldn't wrap my mind around but I would try to get him to do the same for me, Like, there was a time I broke down on the way to LA once when I was going to watch Chris Hughes do a training. And this was January, mid-January, maybe around 2007. And my car got a flat tire. So I had at the time roadside assistance because my car was still under warranty. And they went to take the car in to change the tire. And I realized that when they sold me the car, they didn't give me the wheel lock key. Oh man, says Detective Flores. And Jodi says, for anti-theft wheel locks. So I had to get a hotel room. I had to get my car towed. It was a big nightmare. And I was kind of hungry. It was dinner time. It was 7:38 and it was dark because it was January. And the tow truck guy knows, he said, there's a Denny's 2 blocks down and there's a Jack in the Box right there. And he's driving me to the motel. And I said, is there an IHOP around? Because I really like IHOP. And he said, like, yeah, but it's like 5 miles back in the other direction. And I was like, okay. And he says, I can drive you there if you want. And I was like, he's like this short Mexican guy, and he seemed really harmless. And I was like, okay. And he said, and I asked him about his life and if he had a wife and kids. And so he wasn't flirting or he had a girlfriend or something. And Detective Flores says, he's just trying to be nice to you? She says, just trying to be nice. And so I ended up telling, and he didn't ever say anything inappropriate. And then he drove me and dropped me off, and that was it. And I got to eat. And so I told Travis, and he didn't say anything at first, but it got back to Sky. And Sky was like, why didn't you call me? And then I think eventually it was used against me to establish a pattern that I do weird things like that. So that's something we had arguments about a lot. It was, he's just like, Detective Flores says, so he was upset with you about that. He felt a little jealous, but Jodi says, and he told me once that he was a little bit jealous when he found out that I went on those dates, but he said, I know we weren't dating. And he's like, I guess I'm a little bit jealous, but with these other incidents, he says it just concerns him because he thought that I would get myself into a situation where I'd get hurt because I just have that sort of attitude. And I was really, since I joined prepaid, I've been really trying to break out of my bubble and do things that are a little uncomfortable as far as talking to people. And I made a resolution this year to overcome a few fears that I have and I'm really scared of. And I think that by getting into that a little bit, I can just overcome some of that. But he did act jealous, but he wouldn't say he was jealous. He would just say he was concerned. Detective Flores said, but he would tell other people about it? Jodi says, what do you mean? Detective Flores said, did he tell Sky Hughes? Jodi says, oh yeah. I guess I may have told Sky about that. Detective Flores says, but they probably had a conversation with him and he probably voiced his opinion? Jodi said, they had many conversations. Detective Flores said, on how he didn't like it? Jodi says, I know that him and Sky had a lot of fights and arguments, and I was the root of that a lot of the time. But I think, all in all, they especially more recently, they got along a lot better. I think she gave him a really hard time about our relationship. So it's one of the reasons he really wanted to keep it under wraps. Detective Flores says, moving over to this trip to Cancun that he was going on, when did you find out about that he was going with Mimi? Jodi says, oh, I didn't find out. I found out about that at his memorial services on Monday. It was that Monday night memorial service. Detective Flores says, so you didn't know he was going to Cancun? Jodi says, I knew he was going, yeah. Detective Flores says, you didn't know he was taking Mimi? Jodi says, I didn't know that. I think that's actually awesome. Detective Flores says, yeah, well, unfortunately, Mimi had called him a week or two before and had told him, look, if you want to take someone else, that's fine, but I have something to tell you. I don't look at you that way. I don't look at you as my boyfriend. If you want to be friends, we can be friends. And that really broke his heart. Jodi says, I know. I mean, he didn't tell me, but I found out from the bishop afterwards when I talked to his bishop, and his bishop did say that Travis really took that one hard, and he said he took it to heart, and he realizes that it's speaking from a bishop's perspective. He said It's because, Mimi is of a certain caliber when it comes to her spirituality, and Travis was just in another place. Detective Flores said he's struggling, and it's just something he struggled with for a long time. Jodi says, well, I feel responsible for that part. Detective Flores says, why do you feel responsible? Jodi says, because I had moved away, but I had participated with him in so many things that kept us both down spiritually for a long time. If I had just cut off ties with him completely, I could probably be married right now. I could probably be working on my own family. And, hold on a second. Thank you so much, Debbie Zito. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Now let me go back to where we were. What kept you so close to him, says Detective Flores. I don't understand. Jodi says, well, moving is expensive for one, so once I was there, I was really kind of stuck there. Detective Flores says, but why do you continue to go back to him? You know what he wants. You know that it's not healthy, but yet you continue to go back, and it brings us to the point where we are here right now, okay? And, Jodi says, I guess I physically, Detective Flores says, you keep saying you knew that it wasn't healthy and you knew it was contributing to something that wasn't good, and yet you guys continue to do it. Jodi says, yeah, and part of my perspective now has to do with the fact that I'm going through a process that I've worked out with, my bishop, and he's given me, certain scriptures to read and ponder and pray about, and it brings me back to where I was prior to all of that. I don't know how much I've ever really was there as much as I am now, because even before I was baptized, even the 2 days before I was baptized, for days it was on a Wednesday, I was baptized on a Sunday before Thanksgiving, and it was just like Travis and I were making out, and and that was prior to, we hadn't gone all the way at that point, which is too far. And I called him that evening, and I said it felt different. The first time, that was great, whatever. And then it just felt different this time. And it was just before I was about to be baptized, and I had always had my interview. And so it was like, it felt different. And he's like, yeah, I feel the same way. And I think that's the Spirit telling us that that or the other. I think by driving the Spirit away so much, you just get into this kind of a pattern. I don't know. There were a couple of times when I didn't answer his text messages, and he would send me little sad faces, or eventually he would wait, and then he would call, and then he would call again. And if I didn't answer, he would then call 3 times. Detective Flores says, you guys kept this relationship hidden from everyone else, and because nobody really knew about it, there were some people who I've talked to who say they continue to have a relationship even after they broke up. And there are others who are saying that you had become obsessive with him to the point where you would go into his house when he wasn't there, or when you weren't invited, and he would talk to people saying, she just kind of showed up, and I don't want to tell her to leave, but I didn't want her here. Jodi said, oh, there were. And that must have been early on, because there were a couple of times when we established a rule early on. Just don't come over. He said, you can come over anytime, but I need to know first. Detective Flores said, yes. Jodi said, he's like, you just never know if there's people. Detective Flores said, because you ran into somebody one time, right? Didn't you run into like one of his ex-girlfriends as well, or was it Deanna that you ran into? Jodi says, oh, yeah, well, that was okay that I was there. He asked me to stay there and be with Napoleon, because that was during a general conference in October of last year. He took a road trip with some friends from his church to Utah, and unless he's going to California, he pretty much leaves Napoleon at home, and so someone needs to be there, and it's like I've got full house privileges. I could sleep in the bed. I could eat, food. Detective Flores says, I talked to her, and she said that it was kind of an unusual situation, and she didn't expect you to be there. Jodi says, she didn't at all. And so at first I was like, Did you give Deanna any, flack over coming over unannounced? Because he said that we had just set this rule, and he is like, I talked to her about it. He's like, but I'll tell you what, I was on the phone for 3 hours with her, and she was freaking out that you were there. And I think the more people knew about us associating, the more stress we got from it. And so it was just easier to try to keep it in secret. And we didn't always do a good job. And I think his roommates may have seen or heard some things, but they were kind of kept to themselves types. So we didn't worry too much about them. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says there was actually one roommate, John Hepworth, who ended up remarrying his same wife and moved back to Utah. And I was cleaning his house one day, and John told me, he was like, Travis is dating? And I said, okay. And I assumed he was like, going on dates and things. And he's like, no, he's really trying to date. And I said, oh, okay. And he's desperate to get married. And I said, I know that's true. And he's like, I just want to tell you that because I don't think he's being honest with you. And I was like, okay. So that night, I confronted him about it. And we had a really big fight. And it was just a bunch of things that were thrown in the mix. And then he said, listen, I'm not dating anyone. But he was very angry at John for getting into his business. He told John in a very nice way, I think, hey, I know that you probably have good intentions, but just, mind your own business kind of thing. And from then on, John, I don't think John or I said anything. And that was in October, I think. Detective Flores says, you've kind of given me a really good rundown of your relationship and how you guys thought of each other and stuff. And I was pretty close to right on with my theory of how you guys, why you continued to see each other and what was going on during that time. I think there's some other things that you're not telling me. I think maybe you were the jealous type, and the jealousy probably continued even after the fact you moved away. And for instance, was it the first week of June, you took a trip to Salt Lake City. Remember the trip we talked about? Jodi says, oh, this year. I'm sorry. I'm thinking back. Yeah. Detective Flores says, you had left, I think it was on a Monday? Jodi says, more like Monday, June 2nd. I remember that now. Detective Flores says, Monday, June 2nd, in the morning or afternoon or something. I can't remember. Late morning? Jodi says, I think it was morning. Detective Flores says, okay, and you had gone down to Redding and rented a car? Mm-hmm. Where did you get that car? Detective Flores says. Jodi says, the Redding airport? Detective Flores says, okay, and do you remember what car company it was? Jodi says, I don't remember the rental company, but I remember the make and model. It was a Ford Focus. Detective Flores says, yeah, I got that from the people in Utah. They said you showed up in a Ford Focus. Jodi says, uh-huh. It was a white 4-door, no cruise control. I like road trips, cruise control. Detective Flores says, you don't remember what company it was? Jodi says, maybe. Detective Flores says, was it with your credit card or? Jodi says, yeah. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, yeah, I could look it up. Detective Flores says, and you took a trip and you decided to go, instead of going over to Utah, you went straight out to the Los Angeles area. She says, I went to Santa Cruz first. Detective Flores says, Santa Cruz? Jodi says, mm-hmm. Detective Flores says, okay. And Jodi says, and I stayed the night in Monterey, and the next day I drove to Pasadena. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, waiting for Laura to call me back. Detective Flores says, you didn't contact her at all? Jodi says, she contacted me finally after I had already left L.A. Detective Flores said, it was too late? You had already left at that point? Jodi says, yeah, and we had plans to do that again. Detective Flores says, and which route did you take home from there? Jodi says, I was supposed to get on the 15 and go all the way up. Detective Flores says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, I somehow got off of 15. Detective Flores said, where did you end up? Jodi says, for a while I was lost, and I'm not above sleeping in the car, so I slept for a while. I'm a heavy sleeper. I sleep a lot. So Detective Flores says, But you were on the 15 for a while and you ended up getting off the 15 somewhere? Yeah, I looked at a map, but I'm pretty sure I knew where I went. Can I draw you a map? Detective Flores gives her a sheet of paper. Sure, he says. Jodi says, because I eventually started seeing signs for Phoenix, and I was like, it was several 100 miles away still. Like, that's weird. Where am I going? She starts to draw the map. So you have California, Los Angeles, and Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and I was supposed to go somewhere right up here. Oops, I'm a lefty, so 15 kind of does one of these. Detective Flores says, yeah, it goes through, let's say, Las Vegas right here. Jodi says, oh yeah, I'm sorry, my map is so wrong. Detective Flores says, no, that's okay. So we'll just put, Jodi says, I know it cuts through Arizona on the corner, Las Vegas, St. George is somewhere here, and then the 40 runs somewhere this way, because somehow I ended up on the 40, and when I saw the 40, I'm like, the only thing that I associate with the 40 is Flagstaff, and Flagstaff is somewhere, Utah, northern Arizona, and so I was going east, and I was like, this isn't, what's going on here? I wasn't going the right way. I've had, for the last 2 years, I've had the car that has GPS system in it, and it's really good. And I think it hasn't served me as far as getting a sense of direction when I moved to Palm Desert. Detective Flores says, yeah, you kind of rely on it a little bit too much. Jodi says, too much. In fact, when I moved in with the last place I lived in Arizona, I didn't know how close it was to Travis. I didn't realize I have a really bad sense of direction, and it wasn't until I began to use my GPS the whole time that I was there pretty much just to find things. So I got back and I looked at the map quest that I had map quested a bunch of places. I was at Death Valley. It was, Detective Flores says, did you actually cross over into Arizona? Is that how far you went? Jodi says, I crossed over twice, I think. My map is wrong because 93 goes north, and then I hit the 15 again, and then I got here, and then I hit Arizona, and then I'm here, but somehow I got on the 93. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, and then I hit the 15, so I don't know where Phoenix is. Mesa, it's got to be over here. I didn't go anywhere near there. Detective Flores says, you took this trip and you left on, was it a Monday the 2nd, right? And you didn't get to Utah until Thursday, you told me. Jodi says, yeah, I got to Utah on Thursday. Detective Flores says, Thursday, that's the 5th. Yeah, I think so. Detective Flores says, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Okay, so we have 48 hours there, but well, obviously 3 days, but there's 48 hours. This trip took you a little over 48 hours. I have a problem with this trip. Jodi says, well, I went first to... Detective Flores says, yeah, I know you went down here, but obviously Eureka's right there, beautiful little place here, except it's kind of smoky. I was hoping to see some mountains, but Jodi says, you should really see Mount Shasta if you get a chance. Detective Flores says, okay, I've gone over this trip over and over in my mind and on paper, and even... there still seem to be 20-odd hours, even if you pulled over to sleep a couple of times. Jodi says, but did I tell you that I got stranded? Detective Flores says, yeah. Jodi says, okay. Detective Flores says, you mentioned that. And if you slept for 10 hours, Jodi says, I only slept for like an hour. Detective Flores says, here and here, it would still leave 18 somewhat hours or something else. This is what people are focusing on. This trip that you took, you left, she took Thursday, Wednesday. This was when Travis was killed. Jodi said, I did not go near his house. Aren't there, Detective Flores says, I pulled your cell records. Your cell phone was turned off between here and here. Okay, but the last place that pulled it was here, and the next place it turned on was here. What does that show me? Jodi says, oh, well, no. Detective Flores said, is there plenty of time for you to do that? Yes, and I do believe that you have come to visit Travis. Yes, I truly believe it. Did you have the opportunity? Yes. You were traveling alone. There were no other witnesses. Your phone just happened to turn off from here to here. Jodi says, well, I didn't turn it off physically, but it died. Detective Flores said, and then it magically, you found your charger here? Jodi said, it was under the seat of the passenger side, and it was when I was, Detective Flores said, when you were lost, you couldn't have maybe pulled over and found it, or... Jodi says, well, I did finally start looking when I was stranded. I wouldn't have pulled over when I was lost. Okay, Detective Flores says, I've been focusing on this and going over this in my mind, over and over in my mind, why this happened, why your phone turns off here outside of Los Angeles. Jodi says, what city is that? Because I got... Detective Flores says, going towards... Jodi says, as far as... Detective Flores says, it's not cities, they're towers. Jodi says, oh, okay. Detective Flores says, there are towers dotted all over this place. One tower hit here, the other tower here on the 93. And there's no way someone can get on that 15 and magically get on that 93, because that's 15 goes right through Las Vegas, right there. It continues this way. It never goes through Arizona. Jodi says, I got off before Las Vegas. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, I didn't get back on. Detective Flores says, to 15, you didn't have to go through Las Vegas and then come down south, go through Boulder City. Jodi says, I went through Boulder City going north. Detective Flores says, did you cross over the dam? Jodi says, uh-huh. Detective Flores says, and you didn't think that was odd that you were crossing over Arizona? Jodi says, well, after I figured out I was lost by then, and I found 93 and found my way back to 15. Detective Flores said, and this tower here, it's not just over the border in Arizona. It's quite a distance inside of Arizona that it hit, because there's a mountain range all along here. And if you're on this side of the mountain range, it's a pretty good distance. The signal's not going to hit or power to Utah or Nevada or California. It's only going to hit in Arizona. Jodi says, well, I had somehow gotten off the 15 and gotten onto the 40 is what happened. Detective Flores says, well, the only way you can get onto the 40 is if you cross the bridge or the dam. Jodi says, I think I got on the 40 in California. Detective Flores says, from the 15? Jodi says, well, like, cause I actually began to drive the 10 West. Detective Flores says, but do you see what I'm saying? The confusion we're having? And we'll come back to this. Jodi says, well, I got on the 40 somewhere over here. Detective Flores says, in California? Jodi says, yeah, and continued to drive this way. I realized I was not in the right place at all, and then I got on the 93 north, and then I hit the 15 again, and then I went through Las Vegas, and then St. George, and then on to Utah. Okay, that still doesn't make sense to me, Detective Flores says, and I can pull up the maps and show you that you can go over and over again, but I don't think you're being completely honest with me about that trip. Jodi says, I honestly got lost. It's bad timing. Detective Flores says, were you at Travis's house on Wednesday? Jodi says, absolutely not. I was nowhere near Mesa. I was nowhere near Phoenix. Detective Flores sighs. Jodi says, I wasn't even close to him. Detective Flores says, what if I can show you proof you were there? Would that change your mind? Jodi says, I wasn't there. Detective Flores says, be honest with me, Jodi. Jodi says, I was not at Travis's house. I was not. Detective Flores says, you were at Travis's house. You guys had a sexual encounter, which there's pictures, and we know there are pictures because I have them, and I will show them to you, okay? So what I'm asking you is for you to be honest with me. I know you were there. Jodi says, are you sure those pictures aren't from another time? Detective Flores says, positive. Absolutely positive. Jodi says, the last time I had any sexual contact with Travis was in April. Detective Flores says, remember I told you about the camera? The camera that was damaged? Someone put it in the washing machine. They ran it through a wash cycle with some clothes of Travis's, but the card's intact. Remember I told you the card was destroyed? I didn't want to tell you the truth because I wanted to make sure those photos were accurate and we can pull deleted photos. I don't care if you delete them 6 months ago. We can pull every photo that was on there, pull the little pixels together, get the timestamps, and we can verify those timestamps. And I have pictures of you in Travis's bedroom with Travis, pictures of him, and it's obviously you guys are having sex, taking photos of each other, and they're dated and timestamped on the day that he died. Jodi says, are you sure it's me? I mean, 'cause I was not there. Detective Flores says, Jodi, it's you. and you know it's you. Detective Flores says, I know all the details of this case. The only thing I don't know is why. Why did you choose to go to visit Travis that day, and why did you do what you did? Jodi says, I never hurt Travis. Detective Flores said, you did. You hurt him. That's why we're here. That's why I flew up here. Because I need to talk to you about this. I can just arrest you and throw you in jail, but I want to know why. Why did you do this to him? Jodi says, I wouldn't hurt Travis. He's done so much for me. Detective Flores says, there's so much evidence in that house. So much. It all points to you. Jodi says, I lived there. I was there for months and months and months. Detective Flores says, I know, and you took pictures of him in the shower just before he died? Jodi says, I don't think he would allow that. Detective Flores says, and the camera actually took a couple of photos by accident during the time he was being killed. Really? Says Jodi. Detective Flores says, yeah, Jodi, really. You were there. Quit playing this game. It's time for you to just come out and tell me. Jodi says, I didn't. No. And I did not hurt Travis, and I did not hurt Travis. I wouldn't do that to him. Detective Flores says, we have the pictures. Jodi says, can I see the pictures? Detective Flores says, we have your blood at the scene. We have your hair with blood at the scene. We have your left palm print at the scene in blood. What's going on there? Jodi says, well, I can explain the blood and the hair. I don't know about my left palm print. Detective Flores says, how can you explain the blood and the hair? Jodi says, well, because I used to bathe Napoleon all the time, and, Detective Flores says, you haven't been there since April, right? Jodi says, Detective Flores says, he's had the house cleaned several times since then, and this hair was not just a hair, from the shower or something. This hair was stuck with blood and obviously had blood on it at the time it got stuck where it ended up. Jodi said, my hair would have been all over. Detective Flores said, there's no way, there's no other hair. Jodi says, can you take a hair sample and Detective Flores says, we have your DNA. Jodi says, no. But I mean, you know how they can do drug tests and find out when things were done? Can you? Detective Flores says, no, we can't do that. Jodi says, can't you measure the time? Detective Flores says, we have DNA matching that hair to you. Jodi says, okay, I know, but Detective Flores says, and that hair had a follicle on it, and that means that hair wasn't there very long. The follicle will usually dissipate and go away after a certain time. It will fall off the hair itself. Jodi says, well, when I would brush my hair there, Detective Flores says, Jodi. Jodi says, Detective Flores said, this one, you absolutely cannot. You cannot explain that away. You either had blood on your hand. Jodi immediately turns both hands palm upward and starts to examine her palms, as Detective Flores talks to her about having blood on her hands. Detective Flores says, when you touch the wall, or there was blood on the wall when you touched the blood. Jodi says, could my palm print have already been there and then I touched it? Jodi, says Detective Flores, Jodi, this is over. This is absolutely over. You need to tell me the truth. Jodi says, listen, the truth is I did not hurt Travis, okay? So Detective Flores says, Jodi, you can continue to do this, okay? The records show that you reported a gun stolen. 25 auto. That happens to be the same caliber as the weapon used to kill him. She says 25 auto was used to kill Travis? Detective Flores says, yeah, along with multiple stab wounds, Jodi. And if you want, I could show you some pictures of him. Do you want to see pictures of him? Jodi says, part of me does and part of me doesn't. Detective Flores says, why? Because you don't want to remember? Jodi says, no, Detective Flores says, Jodi. Jodi says, there's a morbid curiosity. Detective Flores says, Jodi. Jodi says, I want to know how he died. Detective Flores says, we can't keep playing these games over and over. I am not going to believe you. Jodi says, all right, listen. And Detective Flores says, when you start telling me the truth, then I can believe you. But I can't deny this evidence. I can't. The trip you took doesn't make sense. The opportunity was there. Your pictures on that date with him, your blood is in the house mixed with his, mixed not alongside, but mixed. Your hair is in there with blood, and your palm print is in there in blood. It's over. Jodi says, could it have been my blood from before? Detective Flores says, your image is not important right now. Saving the rest of your life is. Jodi says, listen, if I'm found guilty, I don't have a life. I'm not guilty. I didn't hurt Travis. If I hurt Travis, if I killed Travis, I would beg for the death penalty. Detective Flores says, was there anybody else with you? Jodi says, I was traveling alone the whole time. Detective Flores said, was there anybody else with you at Travis's house on Wednesday the 4th? I was not at Travis's house on Wednesday the 4th, Jodi says. Detective Flores says, you were, because that's when the blood was left on. The bloody palm print was left on his wall. I don't know what to tell you. If you were in my shoes and I had this evidence against you, what would you say? Jodi says, if I had that evidence against you? Detective Flores says, yeah. Jodi says, it would be pretty obvious, but I guess being in my position, it just seems so impossible. I'd want to see it. I'd want to know. I mean, I'm not a murderer, but I guess if I were to do that, I'd wear gloves or, something. I don't know. Detective Flores says, I know you tried to wash him off. You tried to get some of the blood off. You tried to clean him up a little bit. But you're even denying the pictures of you being there. There are pictures of you laying on the bed in pigtails. Jodi says, pigtails? Detective Flores says, yes. I've got pictures of you that I've blown up, and you've got this little mole right there. It's the same one. It's you. It's obvious. I can show you some of these pictures. Do you want to see the pictures? Will that change your mind? Jodi says, I'm curious. Detective Flores says, okay, let me take a break then. Let me go find them. I'll bring them in and show you. Jodi says, I wasn't there. Detective Flores says, you need to think about what you're saying. This continuing to lie is not going to help you. Jodi says, if it's something I didn't do, it won't help me either. Okay, let's say for a second that I did, and I say I did it. Detective Flores says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, the motive is there, jealousy issue. Jodi says, but I wasn't. I wouldn't even say it was jealous. There may have been some jealousy there, but Detective Flores says, then what is there? What caused this? Jodi says, I think if anyone, maybe Travis was jealous, but Detective Flores says, that's not what everyone else says. Oh, they know he was jealous, but they think that you were absolutely obsessed. Obsessed is the word that they use. That's the word I hear from everybody. Fatal attraction. I don't know how many times I've heard that. Look at Jodi. Jodi had to have done this. Or she had to have someone do it for her. There's not one person that says anything else. Why is that? That's the perception they have of you. And there's a reason for that perception. Maybe because it's true. Jodi says, maybe because we kept hanging out. Detective Flores says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, but not because it's true. Detective Flores says, because of this, I can prove you were there. I can prove it. But what I don't have is answers of why it happened. Or, maybe something just got out of hand. Maybe things got out of hand. Jodi says, did you find the gun? Maybe that would... Detective Flores says, Jodi, we're just playing games here. The gun was in your possession. When did you report it stolen? Jodi says, I didn't even know that there were guns until my grandparents reported it stolen the day their house was broken into. Detective Flores said, when was that? Jodi says, I don't remember. It was a few months ago, maybe. Detective Flores says, what did you do with the gun? Jodi says, I don't have a gun. Detective Flores says, they're going through your house right now, so they're going to find anything there that will lead you back to this. Jodi says, I don't think they would. There's nothing there that could link me there. That's pretty compelling, I have to admit. If you found my palm print there, I don't know, that's... Detective Flores says, do you have a pair of sweatpants that's got stripes around the back side with zippers? Jodi says, Detective Flores said, somebody's seen you wearing those before. Jodi says, I've got so many clothes. Yeah, I think I do. Wait, I have. Well, I have one that zips up in the back. Detective Flores, it's got like stripes, like a big stripe. What kind of towards the back? Jodi says, it's got a black stripe all the way down, and they're white. It's got a black, I think I have those. They're at the house. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, it's got, I have 2 pairs, actually. One is too small and one is just about right. When I bought, anyway, one was too small and it was on sale and it was a good deal. But yeah, they have stripes and they have a zipper. What does that mean? What is that? Detective Flores says, because I believe you were wearing a pair like this when this happened. Remember I told you about the camera? It was taking pictures by accident. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, the camera was upside down, flash. Another time, camera flash. Looks like it was on the ground. Maybe it was kicked. Look at the pictures. It's obviously a female and one of them was wearing those pants. Jodi says, oh, I didn't even bring those pants on that trip, so... Detective Flores said, if we find those pants, is that going to make my case a little bit better? Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a little break, but I think you need to tell me about what you're doing here, because the best thing for you to do now is to tell me the truth. Tell me exactly what happened, because you know what? Because I think your mom and dad really deserve the truth. They're going to be asking, and it's so important that you tell me why this occurred. What was going through your mind and what caused you to do this? It happened, and I can prove it happened, and there's no doubt in my mind, and there's absolutely no doubt in anyone else's mind who's investigating this that you were there, you did this, but I'll let you think about that, okay? I'm going to go look for some pictures, and I'll bring them over, and we'll continue this discussion, okay? Let me go find them. I'll be right back. She says, take your time. I'm not a murderer. He leaves the room, closes the door. She sits quietly. She starts rubbing her fingers under both eyes. She examines her fingertips, her hands. She runs her hands through her hair. She leans back. She does a yoga pose. She reaches her arms across the table. She rests her head atop her outstretched hands. She takes a sip of water. Then Detective Flores returns. Jodi says, what kind of gun is that? Just curious. Detective Flores says, it's a Glock. Jodi says, I just bought a gun. Detective Flores says, did you? Jodi says, Detective Flores says, they probably found it by now. Jodi says, probably. I was taking it somewhere? Detective Flores says, there are just a few photos, and I want to be careful not showing you certain photos. Jodi says, please don't show me something unintelligible. Detective Flores said, because some of them are very bad. That's obviously Travis's house, right? Remember that? Jodi says, yeah. Detective Flores flips through a binder. And Jodi says, if Travis were here today, he would tell you that it wasn't me. Detective Flores says, well, my job is to speak for Travis right now, and everything Travis is telling me is that Jodi did this to me. Have you ever shot a .25 auto? Ever touched it? Jodi says, the one that was stolen? Detective Flores says, Jodi says, I've never seen it. My grandpa says it looks like a toy gun. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, I don't know what a .25 looks like. I know what a .22 looks like. Detective Flores said, it looks like a .22 actually. Jodi says, well, the .22s that I saw kind of look like the ones in the westerns where they have the long barrel and the long, Detective Flores says, Jodi says, but there was another .22 in the store. And that looked like a toy gun, and it looked like a squirt gun, like a water gun. I don't know. Detective Flores keeps flipping through the crime scene photos. Detective Flores says, I want to know which pictures to show you. What about this one? He shows her the photo of Travis sitting in the shower, looking at her. Jodi says, is he naked in the shower? Detective Flores says, yep. Yes, he is. Jodi says, Travis would never go for that. Detective Flores says, soon after you and him had sex on his bed. Jodi says, that couldn't have been too soon after. Detective Flores says, an hour or so. Jodi says, the last time we had sex in his bed was in April. Detective Flores says, 2 hours. Detective Flores says, these didn't come out very good because they are copies of your photos. I wanted to cover you up because... Jodi says, oh. Detective Flores says, that's you, all of you. Jodi says, that looks like me. Detective Flores said, that is you. We've got them all right there. Jodi lifts up the piece of paper that Detective Flores has placed on top of the photograph in order to cover up her naked body and private parts. Jodi wanted to see this part so she could lifted the paper and looked. Detective Flores said, you can look at the rest of them if you want. There's a few of them. There's a few more I'll try not to show you because I don't want to put you out there like that. Let's just say I've seen all of you and I've seen all of Travis, but the one that sticks in my mind of Travis is on the autopsy table. I'm not going to show you that one, or should I? But this one, I don't know if I should show you, but nothing bad, too bad. But it just one of the photos that was taken by accident, and this is just a small portion of it. He turns the book towards Jodi. That's your foot, Jodi. These are your pants. Now it's off color because they had to enhance it, and the color had to change just a little bit. That's Travis. Jodi says, this is his bathroom. That is not my foot. Detective Flores says, those are your pants. It's a different color, like I said, because we had to enhance it in the color changes. The zippered backs. Jodi says, I have both of those pants at home. If those are the same ones, I don't have a zipper there, though, not on mine. That is a black stripe, and this is a white, and the black goes around. Detective Flores turns the pages in the book. Detective Flores says, I couldn't even recognize Travis. He had been there so long. Jodi says, I keep thinking about his brother, address him. Detective Flores says, well, this is another one. Just a copy, but it's you. Same day, all timestamp. First picture, see? The date, 6408, 5:22 p.m. The photo of you started, on Travis's bed about 1:30 to 1:45, something like that. Jodi says, I don't know that kind of camera they got. Detective Flores is right there. See that? Jodi says, that spot? Detective Flores said, see those spots right there? They look a different color because we used a chemical to enhance it. That right there is blood. That's a mixture of yours and his, and that's your palm print. That's the palm print of your left palm. Jodi says, I don't have any cuts on my left palm. Jodi looks at her palm. Detective Flores said, nobody said that your cut was on the palm. Do you have any recent cuts that are healed? Jodi says, well, my cat scratches me, little things. These are all her work. You can see this is her. That's her. I've got scars. She's a feral cat. All these little things are from her, though. Detective Flores says, well, enough about your cat. But why is your palm print in blood? Jodi says, how can that be my palm print? Detective Flores said, because you were there. Jodi says, as she points to a photo in the binder, what is this? Detective Flores says, that's before we used the chemical. We thought we'd get something from that, but that is where your palm print was, right on the wall. Detective Flores says, I can go over and over and over again, over and over again. Detective Flores says, but there's no doubt in my mind that you were there. There's no doubt in my mind that you did this, none. So you can go until you're blue in the face and tell me you weren't there and you had nothing to do with this, and I won't believe you. I will not believe you because Travis is telling me that you did this to him. That's my job. My job is to speak for him, and this is what he's telling me, and I want to know why. It's killing me inside. I don't know why. Jodi says, there's no reason for it. There's no reason why. There's no reason I would ever want to hurt him. Detective Flores said, there's no way anyone else did. Jodi said, he never raped me, never. There's no way anyone else could have left your palm print and blood on that wall. No way. Get that through your head, Detective Flores says. Jodi says, if I was ever going to try to kill someone, I would use gloves. I've got plenty of them. Detective Flores said, nobody said you had planned this out perfectly. Maybe you were going there to just talk to him, have a good time with him. Something got out of hand. Jodi says, even if I were there, and even if I were there to have a good time with him. Detective Flores says, what if I tell you somebody saw you there, a neighbor? Do you remember some of the neighbors? Jodi says, just Dave. Detective Flores says, the next door neighbor and his wife? Jodi says, I don't know his wife. Detective Flores says, some of the neighbors across the street? Jodi says, well, I've never met them. Detective Flores says, but you've hung around quite a bit and they know you. Yeah, they've seen you there on that day. Jodi says, I wasn't there on that day. Detective Flores says, Jodi, you were there that day. Jodi says, and even if I'm trying to think, the majority of the time that I spent there, I had platinum blonde hair. So I mean, and I never once said hi to them, met them, shook their hand, met them face to face, crossed the street. When I spent time there, he wanted to keep it private, so I spent the majority of time inside and not, walking around outside, except for the few times I took his dog up for a walk. Detective Flores said, would they see your car, or did you park down the street? Jodi said, no, they would see it there. I drove an Infiniti, so they would definitely recognize the car, I'm sure. Well, there were a lot of cars there at the time. Detective Flores says, where's that Infiniti now? Jodi says, I gave it back to the bank. Detective Flores says, is it in a pound yard somewhere? Are we going to find any evidence in that car? Jodi says, you're free to look. Detective Flores says, we're going to look. Jodi says, you can also look around in the rental car. Detective Flores said, what company did you rent it from? Jodi says, I don't remember, but I can check my debit card record. Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, I remember the make and model. Detective Flores says, well, we're waiting for it anyway, but all the new cars have GPS in them. Jodi says, oh. Detective Flores says, factory, not for you to use. Jodi says, well, then that's good. Detective Flores said, but for us to use if we need to. Jodi says, well, then that's good, because I was going to ask you. I don't know if there is something that you can recall, but a lot of the stoplights in Mesa and things, they have cameras on them. Isn't there any way you could go back? You could back that up and, see if I were going through that tunnel. Is there surveillance? Is there surveillance anywhere, Jodi says? Detective Flores says, no, unless you run a red light, unless you got caught on a speed camera, but nothing beats that stuff. And I have a solid case against you, and I can present it to the judge as cold as it is now. I don't know why she did it, or I can present it to the judge with your explanation. Detective Flores said, so did you talk to your parents about what happened? Jodi says, I told them I was worried about stuff. Detective Flores said, about what stuff? Jodi said, they said that, well, they knew I was upset about Travis. I feel really bad, by the way. I was acting because I wasn't, especially towards my grandparents. There were a lot of times. Detective Flores said, why are they not surprised that you're sitting here talking to me about this? Jodi says, I don't know. What do you mean? Detective Flores said, they're not surprised. They're concerned. They're hurt. Jodi Arias said, have you talked to them? Detective Flores said, I haven't, but my other detectives, and they're very concerned with you, but they're kind of suspected that you had something to do with Travis's death as well. Whose parents think that? Jodi says, no, that's because I told them that a lot of people were dropping my name, and I said, I'm not worried about it because I didn't do it. But it's hurting my reputation right now, and it's casting me in a bad light. Detective Flores says, I wouldn't be worrying about your reputation right now. I'd be worrying about the rest of your life. That means nothing. Absolutely nothing. Jodi says, well, my reputation will affect the rest of my life, so I'm worried about my reputation. Detective Flores says, are you going to continue with the story that you weren't there in Mesa on the 4th, that you weren't in Travis's house, that you didn't have sex with him, and that you had nothing to do with his murder? Jodi says, those pictures are, I don't know. To me, pictures are very compelling. I don't know that they can be modified, they can be altered, and date and time stamps. I don't know, but I think they can be tampered with. Detective Flores said, I didn't modify anything. Jodi says, I didn't think you would. Detective Flores said, we take absolutely special care of what we do. Jodi says, I know. Detective Flores said, we actually take an image of the card, or let's say you got a computer. We take an image of the hard drive and we make copies of it. We don't even touch your hard drive. We just work with the copy. And that's exactly what we do with the photos. We don't even work with the originals. We just make an exact digital copy of everything. So we don't touch it, and then we analyze it. And our guys are so good. Every case they've ever done that I know of has never been lost in court. It's been argued and argued and argued. There's no way that they duplicate or that they enhance or that they change or that they do anything to a photo. Jodi says, if I see what happens, Detective Flores says, you'll have to pay the price. Jodi says, well, what's the price? Detective Flores says, I don't know. Jodi says, don't you know what the sentences are? The sentences are carried for something. Detective Flores said, it depends on your situation, how old you are. It depends on the type of crime. It depends on whether you show remorse. And part of that remorse is at least coming clean. When somebody doesn't come clean, I don't see any remorse. I don't know if the judge would see any remorse. I don't know if the jury would see any remorse, but I don't know. That's not for me to decide. My job is to investigate, find out who did it, what they did, and present it to a court, and that's it. Jodi says, I just can't imagine. Detective Flores says, you have something to tell me, but you're just so resistant. I know you're afraid, but you're already going through it all right now. There's no backing out. There's no backing out to yesterday, and there's no backing out to that day. It's already happened, and unfortunately, you're going to have to face the consequences. She says, if I did that, I would be fully ready to face the consequences. I'm not really for things like, I'm all for the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Detective Flores says, Okay, but Detective Flores says, there's no evidence to show anybody else did that. None. And then she says, well, Detective Flores says, do you think we'd find somebody else's fingerprints if they did that? Possibly. There's something that happened. You keep saying gloves. There's things that happen when people wear gloves that we can actually see that, somebody wore gloves in this case. Nobody wore gloves in this case. Nobody. Jodi says, well, I'm just saying that if I were to carry out something like that, I would have worn gloves. I have a whole box. Detective Flores says, nobody else did this. There's no evidence to show that nobody else did this but you. You're the only one. That's it. That's it. I'm not seeing any remorse. I'm not seeing anything from you to make me believe anything otherwise. You can continue to say I didn't do it. Jodi says, well, Detective Flores says, but you're the kid that got caught on videotape stealing candy. And you continue to say it wasn't me. I have the proof. I have the pictures. It wasn't me. I don't think you would admit to it if your own mother saw you do this and she told me, yeah, I saw her do this. You would say, nope, it wasn't me. Why won't you admit to it? Jodi says, I just can't. I didn't kill Travis. I just didn't. I did not take his life. Detective Flores says, did you have anything to do with the death of Travis? Jodi says, I don't think I had anything directly to do with it, but I feel responsible somewhat for it. Detective Flores, then what can you tell me about his death? Jodi, you know a lot more about it than I do. When I say I feel responsible, it's because I wasn't planning to go there at all, and he really wanted me to go, and I told him no. And I would have if it weren't for Ryan, and there's nothing really with Ryan and I. In fact, he has been very hesitant to move anything forward because he's not sure about me. He said a lot of people are talking. I'll just tell you this right now. I really wish this would get solved so that we could just put it behind us. Maybe that's a good thing because he's not an active church member anyway, but the reason I feel is because if it weren't for Ryan, I would have folded, and I would have just scrapped all my plans and spent all of my days there. But I didn't. I stood strong, and he got mad, and he got sad, and he guilted me. He didn't get really mad. He just kind of guilted me. And finally, I was like, fine, whatever, and I hung up. I feel that if I would have gone there, I could have done something. I could. Detective Flores said, but you were there, Jodi. You were there on the Wednesday, the 4th, Jodi says. Can I ask you, I don't know if you know this. I have a camera, and it's in my storage unit, and I don't use it anymore, but Travis and I used it frequently, and we took pictures with it. I don't know. This is kind of, Detective Flores says, do you remember taking these pictures? Jodi says there were many pictures. We took tons and tons of pictures. Some I saved, and most we deleted, and some he sent me through his phone. He usually deleted all the pictures like this, Detective Flores said. Jodi says, yeah, well, before he got... Detective Flores said, any pictures like this that I found anywhere on his computer, camera, anything, they were deleted. Jodi says, well, prior to him getting his camera, all of those pictures were on my camera. So... Detective Flores said, all these same pictures? Jodi says, I don't know. I don't know. We took a bunch the week before I left. We took a bunch over the last 6 to 7 months, and we took over the last year, even when we were dating, but we would delete them mostly. They were some that he sent to me that I didn't delete. What I'm asking is it possible that my memory card would still have been in his camera if they're interchangeable? Detective Flores says, how do you know if they're interchangeable? Jodi says, I don't know. That's why I'm asking what kind of memory card it was. He says, just a little SD card. Jodi reaches across the table. She picks up a pen and she begins to draw on the paper. She says, well, because I've got one that's like this big and it's thin, like a cracker. That's one I use in my professional camera. It's like this size and it's more kind of like that big. And then it looks, and then the little one is really thin and it's got this like little thingy here. And one looks like it's like that in the middle part. So it's obviously probably wouldn't be interchangeable because it's a Canon and it's, Detective Flores says, it's not interchangeable. Jodi says, but the other one, I don't know. Detective Flores says, your camera's here. His camera's there. He just bought that camera. Jodi says, well, the other camera that I used before that's broken now in my storage unit, but it's still there. Detective Flores says, and you're saying those pictures are on that camera? Jodi says, no. What I'm saying is I had several memory cards for this camera that I don't have anymore, and so I guess it's so far-fetched, I would guess it's possible that's my card. Detective Flores says, you're saying somebody took your pictures on your card and is framing you and put that into his camera, and Jodi says, no. I'm not. I'm just saying that if my memory cards were left at his house, he could, well, he would have used those for his camera. I don't know. I explain the blood, though, and I can explain the hair. I don't know about the palm print. Detective Flores said, I can explain the blood or the hair. Jodi says, well, the hair, there's hair everywhere, and probably every square inch of that house, my hair. You sweep it up, you'll get hair everywhere, all over, around the toilet, in the shower. I don't know about the shower because the shower gets used, but definitely around the bottom of the sink area and maybe in the trash. Detective Flores says, it still doesn't explain the hair to me. It had a follicle in it. You haven't been there since April. There's no way. The blood? No. The blood is mixed with his. And that's the blood he bled that day when he was killed. Jodi says, well, you can check how fresh the blood was. Detective Flores says, no, we can't check how fresh it was, but we can go by where it is. Jodi says, oh, okay, because I cut myself. Detective Flores says, are you saying that the blood that you cut yourself with back who knows when is still on the wall in the exact same spot? Jodi says, oh, I don't know. Detective Flores says, where the bloody palm print was? Jodi says, it was a glass that Travis had that I was using to wash Napoleon with. I used to give him baths, and I dropped it. And when I picked up all the glass, and I'm pretty casual about it because I break glass all the time at work, and it's not a big deal. It's nothing to be scared of. I was probably just being careless with it, and I sliced myself open, and Detective Flores said, is that how you want to leave this? These far-fetched excuses of why your blood is there, why your hair is there, why your palm print's there, what pictures are there? Jodi says, I don't know about the pictures. Detective Flores says, that's how you want to leave this? I wouldn't want to. I seriously would not want to. You need to come out and tell me why this happened. I will not accept any other excuses. I will just move on with my investigation, write my final report, submitting all the conclusions and all the evidence, and we can just let a judge and jury decide. You yourself said that if you were in my shoes, you would think that I was guilty. We can leave it in the hands of a jury. Jodi says, what about a lie detector test? We can do that. That's fine, says Detective Flores. Would that help me at all? Jodi says. Detective Flores says, I mean, you can't use them in court, but Jodi says, well, then there's no point in taking that. I thought those things could be used. Detective Flores said, in certain cases. Jodi says, in this case setting? Detective Flores says, if you want, I can check, absolutely. Jodi says, if I pass the lie detector test, would that help you? Detective Flores said, it could help you. Jodi says, You're so weird anyway. Travis. Detective Flores said, this is your one opportunity to talk to me. It's going to be a while before I can talk to you again, and it's not going to be in this kind of a setting. Do you understand what's going to happen to you? Well, we're going to, since these charges are out of Arizona, we're going to send you through the court system, and then we're going to ask to extradite you to Arizona from California. I just need permission to bring you over because you're out of state. And the next time we talk could be in a whole different setting. It could be in a jail somewhere. And I think that setting is a little bit better. It's up to you, Jodi. I know you were there. I know that Travis was either in the shower or just outside the shower when he was shot. And I know someone was extremely angry at him, took a knife to him, and couldn't stop. Couldn't stop. Before you knew it, it was all over, and you panicked. And then, Jodi says, I've never been that angry at him. No, not for that. I've been so far angrier at other people, at other ex-boyfriends. Detective Flores says, then tell me you could have done this. Who did this? Jodi says, I don't know. But if I go to trial for this, and if I'm convicted for this, whoever did this is going to be sitting very pretty somewhere. Glad that it wasn't them. Detective Flores says, and it's my job to make sure that innocent person does not go to jail. But I don't see an innocent person sitting in front of me. When I asked you, I've always asked this one question. Well, it's actually two. First point is, did you kill Travis? And you kind of hesitated a little and say, I didn't have anything to do with that. And then I asked you a similar question. Did you have anything to do with Travis's death? And you hesitated again. Jodi says, that's because I feel like if I had gone to Arizona like he asked, Detective Flores said most people would say no. Did you kill Travis? No. Jodi says, well, I didn't, and I didn't have anything to do with it. Now, do I feel responsible? I've been carrying around guilt since I heard about him. Detective Flores said, why do you feel responsible? If you felt responsible, it means you know something else. Jodi says, no, because Detective Flores said, it means your actions led to his death. Jodi says, because he always has guilted me. He has always guilted me about, and the last time. Detective Flores said, you feel somebody else killed him? Jodi says, well, yeah. Detective Flores said, for what reason? Jodi says, I don't know that. Detective Flores says, then how do you feel guilty? Jodi says, because. Detective Flores says, if you don't know the reason? Jodi says, here's why I feel guilty. One of the last times we spoke, he was guilting me about not coming to see him, and part of my heart still wanted to go see him, and another part just wanted to move on and pursue this new avenue, which was in Utah. And there's a tinge of guilt, and he would text me and he would say, hey, you want to come over and make out or want to da-da-da? I didn't respond one night, and I just stayed strong. And I didn't respond, and he called me, and then he called me the next day. He was like, you don't care about me. You don't love me. You don't care. I was there all alone, and you didn't want to come and hang out. You don't want to come and keep me company. And he says it's not like that in that tone, but it's in the sweetest way, and it's guilt. Detective Flores says, I still don't get the guilt. I really don't. You keep explaining it, but it has nothing to do with whether he... Jodi says, because he guilted me. Detective Flores said, he was killed or not, how is you being there going to prevent him from being killed? Jodi says, well, I kind of feel that if I had gone there, that we could have been out watching a movie, or we could have had two people, or we could have done more than just him. I just feel like if there was some way that I could have prevented it, or some way that I could have done something to stop it. And I told a few people, and they're like, well, you might have been killed too. Maybe, but maybe Travis would still be alive. Jodi says, Travis has done a lot for me, and I wouldn't hurt him. He introduced the gospel to me. Detective Flores said, well, I have proof that says otherwise, Jodi. I can't deny the proof, and the proof is not pointing at anyone else. Nobody in this entire world except you. Nobody else was in the house that day except you. You were the only one, you and him, alone. Jodi says, I didn't even go to Mesa. Can you check? Detective Flores says, yes, we will check. Jodi says, if that comes back, Detective Flores says, and I've looked at the map and the way you said you were traveling, and there is no way. Jodi says, listen, the last road trip Travis and I went on, we drove to Utah. I mean, I'm sorry, we drove to Oklahoma City from Mesa. And one of our stops on the way was the Roswell, after he drove all night and I slept, and that was after we went to the Roswell Museum. It was my turn to drive, and he's like, just get on this and drive 98 point something miles, and then we should be there. So I got on the road and I drove 98.6 or 98.2, whatever miles it was, and I woke him up and I said, I don't think we're here. And it was just like rolling fields forever. And I drove completely in the wrong direction. And I'm not saying I don't know. I'm just saying I have a poor sense of direction. I got totally lost. I know maybe that's just bad luck. I got totally lost. Detective Flores says, even if you got totally lost, it doesn't explain all that time. It doesn't. I mean, if you went for 4 hours here, 5 hours in the wrong direction, it's still a long period of time. Jodi says, well, at one point, I wasn't going anywhere because I ran out of gas. I was totally stranded. I was sitting like a sitting duck. And that's when I began. It was a little bit warm. It wasn't too hot, but that's when I just read for a little bit. I had already slept, and that's when I just started looking around the car, organizing stuff, getting trash together. I had a couple of bites to eat from snacks that I had, and while I was cleaning out under the seat, I found my phone charger. I plugged it in, powered it on, and there was no cell phone reception anywhere. So, you've never seen this camera, Detective Flores said, his new camera? Jodi says, I don't know. He described it. Detective Flores said, did you ever touch his camera? Jodi says, I've never seen it. Detective Flores said, okay, so there's no reason your fingerprints would be on it? Jodi says, no. Detective Flores says, okay, because the thing's off to the lab right now, and they're hopeful they can get some prints off of that camera. And if your prints come back on that camera, what are you going to say? Jodi says, well, they won't come back on it because I've never touched it. Detective Flores says, but you can't explain the rest of the stuff. Jodi says, I honestly can't explain the pictures, the other stuff, or the palm print. The other stuff I can't explain. Detective Flores says, no, you can't explain the blood either because that blood is in blood. I mean, it's in part of the print. Unless you cut yourself at the beginning of the year and left your palm print in blood and it stayed there until he was killed. Jodi says, I cut myself. It was the beginning of the year. It was before convention. Detective Flores says, no, you can't explain it. Jodi says, I'd have to say in early March. Detective Flores says that palm print is there, in blood, partially yours, partially his. Jodi says, is it possible that there is just any other way in the universe that could have gotten there? Detective Flores said, possible? Probable is the question you need to ask him. Probable is absolutely not probable. Jodi says, I understand that, but is it possible? Detective Flores says, anything is possible. Jodi says, that is very compelling. Detective Flores says, that is why I'm here. That's why I traveled here, because I came here to arrest you and get an explanation from you. That's the second reason. And since you're not giving me an explanation, I guess we'll just continue with the... Jodi says, I have no reason to hurt Travis. Detective Flores says, you do have a reason to hurt Travis. Jodi says, what would my reason possibly be? Detective Flores said, there's a whole history of you two and everybody knows it. Jodi says, I have a whole history with other guys that goes back years. Detective Flores says, why is everybody saying that you had something to do with his death? Why is everybody saying that you're capable of hurting him? Everybody says that, so don't tell me that you're not capable. Jodi says, I don't even hurt spiders. Detective Flores says, have you ever had anger issues before? Never in your past? Jodi says, I've had arguments, Travis and I. Detective Flores says, well, everybody has arguments. I'm talking about anger. Absolute anger where you lose it sometimes. Jodi says, no. I had a nervous breakdown once. Detective Flores said, are you taking any medication or anything? Jodi says, well, I had a nervous breakdown when a boyfriend and I were arguing once. And he began to argue with me in a way that was totally different from how we had ever argued before. And he was just like, and every time I would say something, he was like, blah, blah. You know, it was kind of weird. Like every time I tried to formulate a thought and I was just sad and I was crying, and every time I tried to formulate a thought, he would interject and then twist it. And it was like the weirdest psychological thing that had ever happened. And the way I reacted was, I went into my room. This was this guy I bought a house with. I went into my room and I shut the door, and we had separate bedrooms, and I was in his room, and I went down the hall into my room and I shut the door, And I just remember hyperventilating, and that's all. I don't know. I was crying, and then I went to get something out of my car. And when he saw that, maybe he thought I was going to leave, so he asked me for the key to his truck, and he pulled behind my car because he thought that because I was so upset that I shouldn't be driving anywhere, that I'm nuts. Other than arguments, no anger issues, none that I can remember. Oh, I kicked the dog once. I was a freshman in high school, and I love animals. And once we had this dog. His name was Doggy Boy. And my parents, until this dog that they have now, have never been able to, I don't know. I don't mean just them. We as a family have never been able to care for a dog properly as far as to give it attention or take it for walks or be consistent. So this dog stayed in the backyard a lot and stayed tied up on the in the shade with plenty of, leeway. And at one point, though, he was untied. And I took the trash out. And this is when my little brother and sister were still in diapers. And he tore it. It was diaper trash. And he tore diapers up all over the yard. Of course, I had to clean it. And when diapers get wet, they're like jelly, spongy, weird stuff. Detective Flores says. And Jodi says, and I just got mad. And I just kicked him with my right foot. And he just moved a few feet. And he didn't yelp or anything. But he went away. And I never saw him again after that. I mean, it's probably an anger issue, I guess. But Detective Flores says, well, one time kicking a dog is not an anger issue. Jodi said, it changed my world as far as animal treatment goes because I've never seen him since, and I need to apologize for that to him. I know it sounds weird. My relationship with animals is kind of like, they're like people too, they have souls. Detective Flores says, well, what you need to do is you need to apologize to Travis, but you just refuse. I can't help you anymore if you're not going to help yourself. Jodi says, you asked me why. Detective Flores says, I can't, Jodi. You keep talking till you're blue in the face. I can't continue to listen to lies. Do you have anything else that you need to tell me? Jodi says, you asked me what I've been up to in the week since I got back. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, what did you mean by that? Detective Flores says, just what? Because I know this thing has to be weighing pretty heavy on you. Jodi says, I've been trying to put his death behind me. If I did anything that has anything to do with his death in any way, Detective Flores said, it's not if to me. Jodi says, I wouldn't. Detective Flores said, it's not if. It's not if at all. Jodi says, well, it is to me. I would be more remorseful. Detective Flores says, is it maybe something you're blocking out of your head? Jodi says, I don't think so. I mean, I tend to write everything down. I just finished the book, The Road Less Traveled. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, it says the true definition of sanity is dedication to reality at all costs. So I think at times, I may have, prayed or meditated upon a certain way, like me being wealthy or something like that. But Detective Flores says, well, this is definitely reality. We are sitting here inside an office in the sheriff's department, and you are facing first-degree murder charges. Jodi says, what is the difference? Detective Flores says, you're going to be booked into jail, and eventually you'll be brought back to Arizona, and you will stand trial. And that's the reality. And once you realize that, I think you'll be better for it. And if you really want to embrace reality, you would sit here and you would explain to me why this happened, but you refuse to. Jodi says, I don't know why. I don't know why he was killed. I don't know why. I had issues with Travis. If anything, he had more issues with me. I've had worse issues with other people. They're still all alive. I'm still friends with all my ex-boyfriends. They're all still alive. Detective Flores, I've been doing this a long time, and there's one thing I can never get out of my head. Ever since the first day I had talked to you, there's an old saying that, something's just not acting right. Look into it. You have not acted right from day one. From day one when I talked to you on the phone, I just sensed it. You weren't acting right. You weren't acting like somebody who used to love this guy or still loved him, even as a close friend. And even when I told you that I have all this evidence against you and that you're facing first-degree murder charges. You're just not acting right, Jodi. You're not acting like somebody. You're acting like somebody who's guilty. Jodi says, how so? Detective Flores says, you tell me. I know because I've been doing this a long time. Jodi says, it's not that I don't. Detective Flores said, it took me a long time to figure it out, but within the first 30 seconds to a minute of a conversation, I know when somebody is acting right. There's a certain way people act. Jodi says, how did I act that would make you think? Detective Flores says, it's not like TV. It's not anything like that. It's not what you see in the movies. I see reality. When I accuse someone of committing a heinous crime, or, something very serious really hits in, and they definitely act a certain way, and that's not you. You act just like everybody else who I accuse of doing a crime who did it. There's no other way to tell you. Jodi says, is it because I'm not crying? Detective Flores says, no, it's not because of that. Jodi says, what is it then? I mean, I'm not going to change how I act. Detective Flores says, no, obviously you can't change the way you're acting. Jodi says, no, I mean, I am who I am. Detective Flores says, you're sincere in the way you're acting, but Jodi says, well, how is it? Detective Flores says, you're just not telling the truth. Jodi says, how is it different? Detective Flores says, well, it's not something you need to focus on anymore. I think you need to focus on the truth, but it's something you refuse. So if you don't want to continue, then we'll just move on to the next step. Jodi says, listen, it's not that I didn't love Travis, and it's not that I still love him, but I really needed to move on. Detective Flores says, Jodi says, and the last, Detective Flores says, what prevented you from moving on? Nobody was preventing you from moving on. Jodi says, well, the only person preventing me really from moving on was myself. And until I made that step and I moved away, and we communicated gradually less and less and less, and I was fine with that. I haven't found the guy or the man that I want to marry, the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. But in my mind, Travis did, and I was happy for him. And I thought there was also a part of me that felt if I stay, I'm going to jeopardize that for him as well. We both deserve to be happy. We both deserve to have, be married in the temple. Detective Flores says. Jodi says, and that's where he wanted to go. I mean, I didn't know that Mimi didn't feel that way. I've never spoken to her except at church when I came down to Arizona. It was really brief. And it was the bishop who told me that, that she had essentially turned him down in the last few, now that I think about it, he was really just blah, in his attitude and stuff. And I just thought that maybe that's just because we were just beginning to more distance ourselves. And, he still had this trip planned to come up. And the reason I don't know, it's not like that I'm not remorseful that he died. I mean, I didn't kill him. I didn't take his life. Detective Flores says, did you have anything to do with it? Jodi says, I had nothing to do with his death. And at all. The reason I hesitate is because maybe it's just something that's wrong with me psychologically, because I think of the butterfly effect, and it's like you could say that this guy pumping gas at the gas station, pumping gas down at the gas station could have potentially, because you see all these movies, these funky movies where it's like this effect or that effect or this effect. And then Detective Flores says, I know, if you would have never met him, he probably would still be alive. Jodi says, that's true. And Detective Flores says, yeah, that's true because you killed him. Jodi says, no. Detective Flores says, Jodi, you did. Jodi says, I did not. Detective Flores says, Jodi, you can't convince me otherwise unless you come up with more proof that you didn't, but I can't prove that anybody else. Jodi said, could it? Detective Flores says, no, it couldn't. Jodi says, well, what about if the car comes back that it was never even in that area? Detective Flores says, it still doesn't negate the fact that we have all this other evidence here. Detective Flores said, this is absolutely some of the best evidence I've ever had in a case, and I've convicted a few people on less than this. Jodi says, well, So I'm as good as done, right, with that evidence? Detective Flores says, yeah. Jodi says, I just can't admit to something that I didn't do. If it would help my case and get me an easier sentence, I know people pled guilty for those things. Detective Flores says, no, and I don't want you to do that. That is absolutely the last thing that I want. Jodi said, well, I know. Detective Flores said, what I want you to do is I want you to sit here with you, and I want to go over why you visited him that day, what you guys talked about, what caused you to get so angry, and details on what happened. And it's something you probably don't want to remember, but it's something that I need, because for me to finish a case completely, I need to know not just the details, but what was going through your head, your mind, because I need to present this as a full picture, because if I don't feel that I completed my job, and my job is to speak for him, not anyone else. My job isn't to speak for you. My job isn't to speak for his family. It's to speak for Travis, and I know something horrible happened that day, absolutely horrible, something that could have been avoided. Whether something was planned, I don't know. Whether you planned it or whether it was accidental, whatever happened, or if something got out of hand, I don't know. All I can do is speculate, and I want to believe that you are not some cold-hearted person that could just go out and do something like this. I want to believe that, like a lot of people, things get out of control, and before you knew it, it was too late. That's what I want to believe, and that's truly from my heart, because I sit here and I've talked to you, and I'm talking to you now, and all those conversations we had on the phone, and I don't see a cold-hearted murderer like you would see on TV or that I've seen before sit across from me. That's not how I see. That's not what I see in you, and I'm going to call it begging, because I'm begging you to at least come clean and tell me why, because I don't want to leave here today not knowing, because it's all going to be forever. Jodi says, I wish I had answers. I'm sorry. Detective Flores says, you need to just let the answers come out. Jodi says, there's no reason. There's just no reason. Detective Flores says, there's no good reason why this happened. There's never a good reason when someone dies like this. Jodi says, how many times was Travis stabbed? And she's crying now. Detective Flores says, more than I want to remember. And I'm not going to sit here and show you pictures of him after the fact. I don't do that. That's not how I work. This is not for me to do. But eventually those photos come out. She's still crying. Jodi, we're here now. We're right here. I think you're feeling the reality in the moment. She says, no, I'm just feeling all of the things that I'm going to potentially miss out with my family, and I'm thinking of all the things that Travis and his family are going to miss out with Travis. And he had brothers and sisters, and I have brothers and sisters, and it's not fair. Detective Flores said, it's not fair, but this is where we are now. Jodi Arias says, I think he's in a good place, and I know that he's fine. I know that he's doing great. But what about all of his friends, all of his family that are here, and they're going through all this? And I know that it's temporary, but it's so very much right now. She's still crying. There's just no reason I would ever want to hurt him. Detective Flores says, well, you wanted to. Detective Flores says, well, whether you wanted to is a different question. Jodi says, I'm just saying. Detective Flores says, I don't think that you wanted to. I really don't think that you wanted to, but this speaks for itself. It speaks for itself, Jodi. It goes beyond speculation. This is way beyond speculation. This is downright proof, but there's no backstory to it. All I know is that I need a story, or else it's just cold. It's so cold. You don't look like the person who would plan something like this. You're not that kind of person. I can believe other things, but not that. But without the truth, I can't paint another picture, and it's not going to be up to the prosecutor. And it's going to be up to the prosecutor to paint that picture. And if you want that prosecutor, and I've met him, and you don't want him painting that picture because he's good at what he does. I've worked with him before, and you allow him to paint that picture for you, it's not going to be good. Jodi says, it looks like you don't really need anything. It does look like you don't even need a good prosecutor anyway, so Detective Flores says, you're right. Jodi says, I have to maintain my innocence. I can't admit to doing something that I haven't done. There's a part of me that wants to cop out and say it. Detective Flores says, no. Jodi Arias says, well. Detective Flores says, if you're going to cop out, it's because you're telling the truth. Jodi says, well, that's not really copping out. Detective Flores says, well, I don't want you to sit here and tell me a lie to appease me. That's the worst thing you can do for me. But back there, in that mind of yours, is someone screaming to get out and tell me what happened, but you just cannot. Jodi says, he has done nothing, but I mean, for some mean words that he said. Detective Flores says, I know. Jodi says, people have said worse to me. Detective Flores says, right. Jodi says, or just as bad, except for that he has helped me, he has given me money, he was selling me his car on the... Detective Flores said, then why? Easiest terms ever, Jodi says. Detective Flores says, why, Jodi, why? Jodi says, there's no reason why. Detective Flores said, it just happens. Okay. Jodi says, there's just no reason. Detective Flores says, well, I have more work to do. Jodi says, can you give me a rundown of what's going to happen when you leave? Detective Flores says, yeah, Jodi said, just like just today, for example. Detective Flores says, well, you're probably going to be taken across the street to the county jail, and you'll be processed there. You'll be sent in front of a judge, at least within 24 hours, and there's a warrant for your arrest, and the bond's $2 million, and if you can come up with $2 million bond, then the judge will decide whether to, accept that $2 million or not. At that point, we're going to file extradition papers. Basically, our courts are saying that, hey, you have someone in custody on one of our charges, and we want them brought back to Arizona, or at least allow us to come pick them up. And that's what's called an extradition hearing. And you'll be given the opportunity to either waive it or say, no, that's fine, I'll just go on my own free will, or you can fight it and say, no, I don't want to go back to Arizona. Jodi says, what if I say I go on my own free will? Of course I would go. Detective Flores says, yeah. At that point, the judge would say, okay, she's not fighting this, so come get her. And then we would go. Jodi says, well, what if I did fight it? Then what happens? Detective Flores said, then you would have to have a hearing. Jodi says, oh. Detective Flores says, like a little trial. Detective Flores says, not a trial. So Jodi says it just delays the inevitable, basically. Detective Flores says it delays it. Jodi says, and costs the taxpayers money? Detective Flores said, and then you'll be transferred over to Maricopa County Jail in Phoenix, and you'll start your court proceedings there. Jodi says, and Detective Flores said, I've already filed those charges. It went to a grand jury, and the grand jury indicted you. Jodi says, so it's all public now? Detective Flores says, it's public record. Jodi says, so does everyone know? Detective Flores says, if somebody goes on and checks your public record, they can check it, and they would come up with an indictment against you for murder. Jodi says, but it's going to be on the news tonight? Detective Flores says, well, you don't report anything to the news. Jodi says, has the family called today? Detective Flores says, no. Detective Flores says, they don't even know that I'm talking to you. Jodi says, but they've been calling every day. Detective Flores says, every day. Jodi says, are you going to tell them? Detective Flores says, I talk to them every day. How would you feel if your little brother or sister was killed? Jodi says, I've been wanting to call every day too, but I didn't want to look obsessive, so I just tried to limit it to once a week. She starts crying again. And she says, when will I be able to see my family? Detective Flores said, I don't know. Jodi says, can I talk to my mom? Detective Flores says, I don't know what their procedures are in this jail in this county. Jodi says, can I talk to somebody about my affairs that need to be taken care of? Detective Flores says, you'll have to do it over the phone, or they'll have to come visit you. I don't know. Jodi says, well, I would have to be over the phone because the person that would take care of my stuff lives far away. Detective Flores says, are we done? Jodi says, how long is it going to take you to do all that paperwork? Detective Flores says, I don't know. I need to go see. The procedures are different here in California than they are in Arizona. I'm used to the procedures in Arizona, so I'm going to help. So I'm getting help from this county and the deputies here, and they're assisting me, so I need to go get with them and find out how long this is going to take. Jodi's crying. She says, oh, this is a really trivial question, and it's going to reveal how shallow I am, but before they book me, can I clean myself up a little bit? Detective Flores says, you're going to be taken the way you are. I can't give you anything else. Jodi says, how soon? Detective Flores says, I don't know. Jodi says, like 5 minutes? 2 hours? Detective Flores says, I'd say within an hour. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 50 minutes. I need to go talk to my associates here. And if at any time I feel like you need to tell me something And if at any time you feel like you need to tell me something, you just go ahead and approach me. Jodi says, Detective Flores says, okay. Jodi says, can I use the bathroom? Detective Flores says, yeah, I'll get someone to come take you. Jodi says, I'm not like violent. I'm not going to run. It's Eureka. I mean, do I have to go in handcuffs everywhere? Detective Flores says, that's just procedure, Jodi says. Detective Flores says, whether you wrote a bad check or you're facing murder charges, you're going to go in handcuffs. That's just the way it is, okay? They don't take, different precautions for different people. It's the same for everybody, so I'm sorry. Jodi says, I need to ask you when I can start getting a phone call or two. Detective Flores says, once you get booked into the jail. Jodi says, do you know how many I get? Detective Flores says, if it's like ours, they give you a phone and you can make as many collect calls as you want. Oh, okay, Jodi says. Detective Flores says, okay, let me see if there's someone there to take you to the restroom. Jodi says, it's not too urgent, but like maybe in the next 10 minutes, I'll really need to go. Detective Flores says, okay. He leaves the room. She sits alone. She talks to herself. And she says, you should have at least done your makeup, Jodi. Gosh. She starts singing to herself. Lines from the song, Here With Me. And she says, I didn't hear you breathe. I wonder how am I still here, and I don't want to move. It might change my memory, and I won't go, and I can't breathe until you're resting here with me, and I won't go, and I won't hide, and I won't breathe. She picks up a water bottle, starts playing with it, picking off the label. Breathe here, resting here with me. She stops singing. Then she starts singing again. I didn't hear you breathe. She turns around, picks up the trash can, brings it close to her, puts her hand in it. She rummages around in it, turns it around, puts it back. She giggles, runs her hand through her hair, talks to herself. Goodness. Starts playing with her hair. She gets up from her chair, goes over, does a handstand against the wall, stops, flips her hair from the front of her head to the back while still on the floor kneeling. She reaches over to the corner table, grabs a piece of paper, inspects it, puts it back. She turns around, begins singing, O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. This is the day of our dear Savior's birth. She reaches over, takes a piece of paper again from the table. She laughs. She sings lines from the song, O holy night. He knows our need. Hear the angel voices, O night divine, O night when Christ was born, O night. She laughs. She sings some lines from O holy night, O night divine. She reaches behind her. She takes something from the drawer of the table behind her. It appears to be a pen and pencil. She pulls the table closer to her. The paper is on the table. She lays her head on the paper and appears to be doing something on the top left of the paper only. She puts the pen back from where she got it. She bends over and is closely examining the paper. Her head is almost on the table. She plays with her hair. She runs her fingers through her hair. She sighs. She starts singing O Holy Night again. He knows our needs. She hums a few bars of the song. She giggles, talks to herself, unintelligible, still sounds like still hate me brat. Then a female officer enters the room to escort her to the bathroom. Here are your shoes. Why don't you go ahead and put these on? Jodi puts on her shoes, gets up, walks out to the door. Female officer says, stop right there and turn around. Put your hands behind your back. And then the sounds of the handcuffs being tightened. And, hang on. Jodi's in the interrogation room, handcuffed behind her back, wearing orange prison garb. She sighs. Jodi starts singing. Just remember in the winter, far beneath the bitter snow lies the seed. Jodi leans over, scratches her head on the side of the table. The female officer enters the room. Female officer says, all right, do you want to go ahead and stand up as I take these cuffs off? You just go ahead. You put your hands down at the waist. I know these, especially these types of cuffs, aren't the most comfortable. Jodi says, do you think they're really designed for comfort? Female officer says, nope, they're not. Okay, you're not going to give us any problems being out of the cuffs. You really don't look like that type that would. She gets a recorder from the back table, places it in front of her on the table. She says, okay, today's date is July 16th, and my name is Detective Rachel Blaney. I'm here with Jodi Arias. Is that how you say your last name? Arias, Jodi says. Female officer says, Okay, I'm sorry. Jodi says, that's okay. Rachel says, this is just a formality. And this is, if I have to, write up a report of what we talked about, at least so I know word for word what you said, and there are no mistakes, okay? So it's for your own protection or good that we record it. Rachel says, and before we go any further, I want to read your Miranda rights again, just to make sure that you understand. You have the right to remain silent. Do you understand? Yes. Anything that you say may be used against you in court. Do you understand? Yes, Jodi says. You have the right to the presence of an attorney before you and during any questioning. Do you understand? Yes, Jodi says. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you free of charge before any questioning if you want. Do you understand that? Mm-hmm, Jodi said. Okay. The reason that I wanted to talk with you this morning, there's a couple of reasons, actually. I've been privy to the investigation and all of the evidence in this case, and to your conversation with Detective Flores yesterday, and there's really no... Let me say this. It's obvious to me that you're not our typical suspect. You come from a good home, a good family. Your parents obviously care about you. And that was evident, when I talked to them yesterday. And you're a bright girl and probably more intelligent than you were letting on yesterday. And there's no question in my mind or any other investigator's mind that you were the person that took Travis's life. But what I need to know, what I'd like to know, give you the opportunity to do is determine whether, you're a cold-hearted murderer who slaughtered the guy, or are you someone who got caught up in circumstances and things got out of control? Because I think that's what happened. Honestly, I'm looking at everything, all of the facts, and in talking to people, I think in every person anybody is capable of harming another person. I think that it's in our nature in general. Most people suppress that. But I think given the right circumstances and, the right time and the right place, anyone could, be capable of harming another person. I see that on a regular basis. And so what I generally see are, the cold-hearted, ruthless types. What I don't see very often, Jodi, are people like yourself that are intelligent and spiritual and caring. And I tend to believe that it was an incident or circumstances, if you will. It looks like if you knew this guy, Travis, befriended you, you got into this relationship, and it certainly looks to me like he took advantage of your generosity and your kindness. One of the other detectives had described him to you as a player, and I don't think that's very far off from everything that I've seen, and I don't think that there's a woman out there who hasn't been treated badly or taken advantage of by men like that. I'm hoping because you come from a good family and because you have, a decent background, I'm hoping that you'll be smart about things and make some good choices for yourself to help better your situation. When this hits the news, and it will go to the media. Do you want to be portrayed as this cold-blooded, cold-hearted murderer? Because the media loves that. That's not, that won't be our words or their words when they do a press release, but that's what the media will look at. Will take a look at the facts, and that's what they'll portray you as. Or do you want to be portrayed as a person that didn't mean for any of this to happen? It just got out of hand, and you're remorseful. Which way do you want to go? How do you want to portray yourself? You're a businesswoman, is that correct? Okay, so you have a couple of different types of businesses, right? So you're a smart girl, Jodi. You've got a lot on the ball, You're a businesswoman balancing everything the way you do, and it sounds like you've got a lot going on, juggling and balancing. You're obviously very organized, well-read. Jodi says, I would say well-read, but not organized. Rachel says, not organized? Why so? Jodi says, I procrastinate so papers pile up and things don't get filed on time, and I lose stuff and I find it later when I don't need it anymore. When I do need it, I can't find it. Rachel says, okay. Jodi says, just general stuff like that. Rachel says, well, maybe you're just not as organized as I thought, so certainly. Jodi says, well, I try. I go through these periods where, today is devoted to organization, and then I'll get organized, and it won't be that way for a little while, and then I'll kind of let it slide, and then I I'll have to go back and clean up again. Rachel says, all right. So I think that the reason you're here is that I think that you should have at least one more shot at the opportunity to do the right thing. You say that you're spiritual. Those are my words, not yours, but that's certainly what I got out of, reading and looking at everything, that you have some sort of relationship with God or some sort of deep spirituality, and so did Travis. And it sounds like, you're cared about what Travis's family thought of him. Maybe that they thought of you. I don't know whether you've ever met them. Jodi says, I met his grandmother. Rachel says, okay. Jodi says, a few times. Rachel says, were they good people? Jodi says, yeah, wonderful. And I did meet his family at his services, but I saw some of his sisters, and he talked about them a lot. I mean, he talked about how proud he was of all of his brothers and sisters because they came from a rough background, but they've all done really well. The female, Rachel says, I would imagine that keeping all of this in, I can imagine, because I've never been there myself. But I can only imagine that keeping all this in is tearing you apart. It's not hard to tell that. You have portrayed yourself as being very strong, but I can see it in your eyes, Jodi. Jodi says, it's not like it's not like that I detect. I mean, my dad said that Detective Flores told him that I was just cold yesterday. And it's not that I'm cold. I'm just resolute. And it's not that I haven't cried, because that's all I've done for the last month. Rachel says, Jodi says, and I've got to work part-time, and at my job, I need to be a happy, cheery person, so I've got to suppress all of that and put on an act while I'm on the clock. Rachel says, Jodi says, and if I'm going to get any more clients for my business, I've got to be an attractive person in my personality, so it's not like I haven't been grieving him since I heard about him. Rachel says, well, you have an image. I understand that you have an image to uphold, and then you've got to portray, you're together, savvy woman, and someone who is falling apart, and not somebody who's falling apart, so that's understandable. Jodi says, I fall apart when people aren't looking. It's at night, then I go to sleep. Travis always used to call me, not always, but frequently, so that's the hardest part, is when I go to sleep at night, and if he wasn't calling me, then I'd just call him sometimes. I just call him anyway, just to hear his voicemail. Rachel says, so let me go back to, choices that you have made. Because again, there's no doubt in anyone's mind what happened that day. There's no doubt that you were involved the day Travis died. Jodi says, listen, I know that I wasn't involved in Travis's death. Rachel says, okay. Jodi says, and Rachel says, but wait, hold on. What you need to decide is, do you want to be portrayed as that cold-blooded killer? Jodi says, well, that's what I was getting at. Rachel says, or do you want to be portrayed as someone that was taken advantage of? And, things were headed in one direction and it wasn't, or I don't know exactly the circumstances because I wasn't there. But I would certainly think that it was to your benefit to appear as if it's something that happened. You didn't plan it. It was, it was a heated moment and you didn't mean to hurt him, because you didn't mean to hurt him, did you? Jodi says, I've hurt him very much emotionally, and I never meant to hurt him, because he said that more than the death. He said that more than the death of his father. Rachel says, and I believe that. How are you going to come clean with yourself between you and God if you can't even look his family in the face and show remorse? I don't think that you're a bad person. I don't think that you meant any of this to happen. I think that things got out of control, and you didn't know what to do. You panicked, and I would certainly like your parents to see that, your friends to see that, instead of the cold-hearted killer that the evidence is screaming to show. And this is, at a certain point, you've got to do this what's right, You've got to make things right for yourself, because otherwise it's going to eat you inside. You're going to be sitting in that cell with all of this churning inside of you. It's going to eat you up. Just because I'm a cop doesn't mean that I don't care, about humanity, about people. I'm not sitting here judging you. I'm trying to help you out, trying to give you a chance to make things right. Show the families that you have some remorse. Apologize for the things you've done if it makes you feel better, whatever it is. But when you continue to deny, when it's obvious that's not the case and you appear to be this cold-blooded killer, there's and the media is going to feed off of that. When this goes to trial, the media is there. It's not kept for a secret. Do you want to be out there like O.J. Simpson? Because nobody felt sorry for him. Nobody respected him after, even though he maintained his innocence. How do you want to be portrayed? Do you want to be portrayed as the person that a decent person who has some tough times, just didn't make the right choices at the time? Or do you want to be portrayed as a person who doesn't care about anybody or anything? Jodi says, of course, I don't want to be portrayed as a cold-blooded murderer. Rachel says, I believe that. I believe that everybody wants to tell the truth, because to keep that lie in tears you up emotionally, physically, mentally. I see that over and over again with people. And I believe that you don't want to be portrayed in a negative light. And I'm not making that stuff up. I meant that's just reality, Jodi. That's the way our society works. That's the way this world works. And things are going to start moving real fast here for you. This is kind of a pause, before things start getting heavy. This is an opportunity to help yourself out. When the jury looks at it, those are the kind of things they're going to be mulling around in their mind when they decide what type of sentence to hand out, or when they make a recommendation to the judge. These are the sorts of things that turn a jury, and a jury sometimes can be fickle. But I've never seen a case with so much concrete, hard evidence. We don't need you to tell us anything. I'm doing this for you. Arizona's case goes no matter what. They've got a rock-solid case, so what you say is basically irrelevant to their case. Not irrelevant, but it's not going to make it any better for them. But it can certainly help you out. Jodi says, how can it help me? How can what I tell you today affect the media? Well, you take control of this situation as much as you can. You paint whatever kind of picture you want to paint of yourself. Nobody's going to believe that you didn't do it after they see this evidence. It is what it is. But it's a matter of, do you want to take control of the situation and paint the picture of who you are because you're the only one that knows that? Or do you want the media to take control of the evidence, all the facts, and the information, and paint their own picture of you? And as smart as you are, you know as well as I do that the media doesn't like to paint warm and fuzzy pictures. They would much rather paint the vicious, cold-blooded killer, because that sells. Am I right? Jodi says, mm-hmm. Rachel says, so do you want to control the situation, paint your own picture, or do you want to let somebody else do that for you? Jodi says, I don't feel that I have any control over what the media says anyway. Rachel says, well, you do, to a certain degree. You can have that opportunity to tell your side of the story. Was it just a matter of, like I said, this guy, Travis, building some sort of what you thought was some sort of relationship, you're hoping for marriage? Because I heard a lot of talk about possibility of marriage, and I know that is the cornerstone of your faith is marriage and family. And if this is something you were hoping for, was he leading you down that path? Did he take advantage of you? Were there promises made that were broken? Did he betray your trust in some way? I don't know. Only you know that. But certainly, if there was a situation, they would look at you in a better light. And if it just went in there and you killed that guy, and just because you're a cold-hearted person, the reasons why are what's going to give you a better portrayal, a better light that you're portrayed in. That's why the reasons why it's so important to you. That's how you take control when you leave, Siskiyou County, go back to Arizona, which eventually you will, whether you fight the extradition or not. It's just kind of a inevitability, Jodi says. Yeah, says Rachel. It's going to happen eventually. You're not going to have the opportunity to do this again. I'm certainly not going to go back to Arizona. You won't have the opportunity, and this shot will be gone. Jodi says, is this your role, though? You're a detective? Rachel says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, oh. Rachel says, this is our jurisdiction, this county, so part of this investigation, if you will, is on us. I've taken an interest. I'm in this case. I saw you. I read all the information, and I'm like, man, she's not the typical person that we see in here. Jodi says, can I ask you a couple of questions? Rachel says, sure. Jodi says, some not personal questions. I know I understand you took some of my stuff yesterday. The female officer says, mm-hmm. Jodi says, where does all that go? To Arizona? 1 second. Okay, so she says, it will be transferred to Arizona. It's held in evidence. There's a list of everything that was taken and a copy of what was left at each, Jodi says, location? Rachel says, at each location. Jodi says, it was a carbon copy, so my parents couldn't read it all, and my grandparents couldn't read everything, and they told me that some of the things were like my camera, for example, which is fine, and I understand that. My concern is other people. For example, I'm a wedding photographer, and I had a wedding on Friday, and she starts crying, whimpering. I feel bad for Brian and his wife, Katie, because those are their wedding pictures. That's all they have of their wedding, and I just want to know when they'll be able to get their wedding pictures. Rachel says, I don't know when. I don't know how. This could go on for quite a while. That's the only thing they have to remember that day. And then that's what Jodi says. And Rachel says they're not going to destroy the wedding pictures. They're not going to get rid of them or anything like that. Jodi says, I just take pride in my work, and I guess I'm not going to have a chance to edit them and make them really beautiful, and they already turned out really good. But and Photoshop has all types of neat effects, and they turn out like magic. So that won't be the case this time, but at least the hard files are there for them, if they're not going to get them forever, even if it's going to suck for them, but as long as they get them eventually. They'll get them eventually, says Rachel. Jodi says, and Rachel says, I think go ahead. Jodi says, my sister. I don't know what her problem is. I mean, she's far less messed up than I am, I guess, but she's in a program right now, and until the end of August, and she's rehabilitating from something. And my mom, we write her, and we only get to talk to her once a week, and my mom was going to send pictures because I have them on my external drive, and I have a bunch of her pictures of her that we were going to help her with, just taking pictures of each other on her prom night, because I helped her do her hair, and I helped her, take pictures, and then I dropped her off, and she just wanted to have some of those because she's all done on Glamorous, and I did a photo shoot with my little brother, and they turned out really good, and she wanted those pictures too. She doesn't have access to any of them now, and those are all family treasures, and I did that, of course, because it's for them, and but I would have made her a CD, but my CD-ROM just wasn't working right, and I didn't get around to making it because I didn't have the proper tools to do it, and she just wants those to mail to Angela. Rachel says, well, we'll see. There are all sorts of things that, paint the picture of a good, decent person where things just went a little wrong, and you're showing so much concern and care. Jodi says, do you know what happened to my journals too? Rachel says, I wasn't there when they took. Jodi says, I know they said they took one, but I don't know if they took my other ones. Rachel says, where were your other ones at? Jodi says, in my fireproof safe. Rachel says, okay, I'm not sure. They have a hard copy, an actual copy of the original copy. Jodi says, if you want my journals, it documents the entire time starting from when I moved to Arizona up until 2 or 3 days ago. Rachel says, where's that safe? Jodi says, it's in my bedroom. They said they went through it. Rachel says, well, then if there's anything, Jodi says, I don't know. Maybe they felt it was irrelevant, but Rachel says, Jodi says, I'm sure that Travis has got a lot of ink in my journal. I don't know. That doesn't matter now because I know you guys think what you think, but Rachel says, it's not, the job of detectives, any detective is to determine, what happened, whether a person, if there's evidence that would clear you, evidence that would convict you, we're totally neutral going in. And it's not a matter of, our opinion or what we think. It's a matter of to kind of look at all the evidence and knowing and, I think you're not grasping the reality of this situation, and I'm hearing what your concerns are. You should be concerned for yourself right now. You should be fighting for yourself. This is not going to go away anytime soon for you, Jodi. You know, you're a young woman just starting your life. You had a lot going for you. You should be fighting for yourself right now. Jodi says, there's really nothing to fight for. If I fight, it just makes it look worse. Makes me look worse. Rachel says, if you fight, Jodi says, and if I give you some false confession, that just makes it look just as bad. So there's really not. Rachel says, no, we don't want a false confession. That is absolutely not what anybody ever wants, ever. I was just hoping to give you the opportunity to show the world, to show the community, show the jury, to show Travis's family that you do have a heart, that you do care, that you are a good person, and maybe things went askew that day. I'm giving you scenarios with what happened that day because I wasn't there. I don't know the emotions that led up to it. There was obviously a lot of emotion. That's very clear. There was a lot of emotion that day and what happened, and so I'm trying, it's like kind of pulling teeth here. I'm trying to give you the opportunity to help yourself, to show the world, to show the community, to show Travis's family that you do have remorse, that you are a good person, and that doesn't benefit me in any way. I get no benefit out of this. My job pays me the same whether I'm sitting here or at home. Whatever. I was trying to give you that opportunity. I asked I could talk to you today to do that. It makes no difference to me. Not personally, but it can make a difference for you. You let this eat at you, and it's going to destroy you or change you in a way that you wouldn't want. There comes a time in somebody's life, and there's always a pinnacle in somebody's life when you have the opportunity to define who you are. Do you want the murder of Travis to define who you are, or do you want to take control of that and do it yourself? Everybody makes mistakes, some bigger than others. I think this is the time in your life. I'm trying to tell you that this is the time, Jodi. This is the time to take control more than I've ever done before, and at least show the people that you love and care about that you have remorse and that you have a heart. Because when they sit there and see somebody who is just stone cold and saying they didn't do it when it's clear to everybody that you did, that's what they're going to see, is a stone cold person. This is your opportunity to change that. You can't change what happened. You can't go back and undo it. It's a done deal. But hopefully you're smart enough to realize that you can have a little bit of control of how you're portrayed. I don't think that you're a bad person. I don't think that you meant to hurt him. I think that you really cared about him and that you really loved him. And that's why there's so much emotion in that day. I'm not sure of the circumstances, the conversations that led up to it. I can only see the result. I think that things got a little heated. You know, you were angry or upset or disappointed or betrayed, whatever the emotion was, and things got out of control. Jodi said we both had betrayed each other, but it was so long ago, you know. The last time we even talked about marriage on a serious level was when we were still dating over a year ago. And the last time he proposed to me, once he proposed to me, a lot of times, but he wasn't always serious. He just kind of said, marry me, you know, as a joke. Rachel said, but how did that make you feel when he said, marry me, as a joke? I mean, did you want to? Jodi says, not after we had broken up. It was kind of like laughs. You know, it was kind of like we would joke that we would laugh. You know, I took it as a compliment because it's like when I did something that maybe in his eyes he saw me as a good person, so he'd be like, wow, this is a good girl, marry me. It was more of a compliment. It wasn't a serious proposal, you know. So marriage, just as much as I love Travis, I just have always, there's something inside that says, you know, he's not the guy I'm going to marry. Rachel says, so then what was it? What was it that left all of this? I mean, there's got to be something, because I honestly don't know. I believe that. I don't believe you know that I don't believe you're a cold-hearted and that you would just go and kill someone on a whim. That doesn't fit your profile. So what was it that led up to this? You know, you tell me, you tell them, you tell, you know, Travis, his family, what was it? push you to your limit. I'm trying to fill in the holes here. I'm just trying to kind of guessing about these emotions, What was it that would make you, so angry or upset? And if you're smart, you'll realize that you're not going to get a whole lot of other chances to do this, probably none. Once the wheels start turning, they move real fast and you'll be out of control. Do you want to have the control over your destiny, so to speak? What about your spirituality and about your beliefs with God. If you continue to lie to yourself, all of us, that's one thing. But God knows. He knows what's in your heart. Doesn't the Mormon religion want you to repent for what you've done? I'm a spiritual person myself, and I don't think that I would want that, inside me. I wouldn't want all of that ugliness of the lies inside of me. I'm not going to sit here all day, and try to convince you to do something for yourself if you're not willing to help yourself. But I just wanted to give you that chance this morning. It's crystal clear to anybody who looks at this case, and there's no doubt in my mind, there's no doubt in any of the investigators' minds that you're the person responsible for Travis's death. It's just a matter of time. How do you want to portray yourself now, Jodi? Are you the cold-blooded killer, or are you a victim of circumstance? Was it in the heat of passion, or was it calculated and planned out and executed? Which one is it going to be? That's how you can control things for yourself right now. I don't think that the type of person that can sit there during a trial, I don't think you're the type of person that can sit there during a trial and see Travis's family over there and continue to maintain that lie in yourself without it tearing you up. Jodi says, I don't think I could either. Rachel says, you have an opportunity. You can't bring him back. You can't bring his life back, but you can at least make things right within yourself, and that ultimately will probably help out your situation. Nobody wants to believe, even your friends. I'm sure I haven't talked to any of your friends, but I know that your family doesn't want to believe that you're that person. Help them understand what happened and why, so that they're not stuck with that, that image of you. Jodi says the only image they're going to be stuck with is Jodi in a big orange suit. Rachel says, yeah, but does Jodi have a heart, or is it cold and ice? Jodi says, they know it, what my heart is like. They raised me. They lived around me forever. Rachel says, how about the rest of the people that just know you as far as an image? They don't know your personality. Do you care about that? Jodi says, I care. Rachel says, how about Travis's family? I care very much about Travis's family, and I can't alter the way they think. They hate me regardless, Jodi says. Rachel says, it's true that their feelings are probably always going to be negative about you. You took their son's life. They can never get over that. Jodi says, I did not take Travis's life. Rachel says, it's clear to everybody what happened, but I was hoping that you'd be smart enough to realize the situation, the reality of the situation, and want to help yourself out. Whether you want to maintain the charade, which isn't going to get you anywhere, or whether you want to do the right thing. And then Rachel says, you're the one that's got to live with yourself, You're the one that's got to look those people in the eye. Jodi says, I have one more question, and it's not going to have a thing listening to what you're saying. It's unrelated, but when they took my purse, I had $240 in cash, and from what I understand, the thing over in the jail, you have money on your books so you can get things like shampoo or whatever. I don't know what I would even need there. But what happens to my cash? Rachel says, well, it's, first of all, they count it all out. They document it, so there's no question of, what was there. I don't know what the procedure will be. Jodi says, I know it's not really it's not your area of responsibility, but who do I talk to about that because my parents don't have money to just keep doling out and making collect calls there all the time or whatever. So Rachel says, well, I can certainly talk with the detectives and put a request in for you, and I'll do that. I don't go back on my word. I don't. I don't know how much longer, you want to sit here and listen to me talk. I was kind of hoping to kind of drill something into your head and wake you up and show you that how you can help yourself. Jodi says, maybe you're giving me more credit than I deserve for being smart. Rachel says, I don't think so. Jodi says, but I just don't see how any of this could help. Rachel says, well, what if it could? Wouldn't you want to do everything you could to help yourself? Jodi says, I don't think my situation is hopeless. I don't think that I can. No, she said, excuse me, I don't. I think my situation is hopeless. I don't think I can help myself. I'm sorry. Rachel says, not sorry to me. Jodi says, I'm just sorry. Rachel says, are you sorry for what happened to him? Jodi says, of course I am. That's awful what happened to him. He didn't show me any pictures, but he showed me the carpet. Rachel said it was pretty horrific, and Jodi says, Travis was very strong. I watched him work out a couple of times. It's super intense. My dad has worked out all my life. He's been a bodybuilder. Oh, gosh, I must drop my coffee there. Whoa, that was crazy. Sort of. He's always been really big. I've seen him work out. I've never seen anybody work out like Travis, and it's just, a couple of times he was really into UFC, and a couple of times he would show me some wrestling moves, and it's like I was powerless. Like there was no way out of it. Rachel says, well, I tell you what. I'm going to take a little break for a couple of minutes. I see you still got some water. I was going to give you some more water. Jodi says, yeah, if you could bring one more, that would be nice. And Rachel says, take a minute to think about what I said, and I'm going to leave you alone. And while I do that, while I do that, she leaves. Jodi drinks some water. Jodi gets up and sits under the table. She pushes the chair out of her way a little bit, rearranges the position of the trash can, appears to be picking hairs off the chair and dropping them on the floor. Sounds like she's crying. And back comes Rachel. Jodi gets off the floor. I got you some water. Rachel says, Jodi, I'm really confused. Maybe I did have the wrong picture of you. All of this time that you and I have been talking, and I've got information from your other interview, and you're talking about insignificant things at this point. You're talking about money. You're talking about material things. You're talking about everything but. Jodi says, I'm talking about people I care about. Rachel says, you're talking about everything but how bad you feel about Travis. You only respond to my question specifically about Travis. Jodi says, if I murdered Travis, I would be very remorseful. Rachel says, I think that I've gotten the wrong picture of you. I think that maybe I was wrong. Maybe you are a cold-blooded person that they're trying to portray. And I'm just really confused. At this point, maybe you're right. Maybe there isn't anything you can do to help yourself. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're not as intelligent as I thought you were. Maybe I was wrong. What do you think should happen to the person that murdered Travis? Jodi says, I've never been one for an eye, but they took his life. And even in the Book of Mormon, that says that that one calls for a life of the person who took his life. Rachel says, do you think that's the path that you're going down right now, that it's inevitable, so why fight it? Jodi says, I'm not sure, kind of. I'm sure. I don't know where I'm going. Rachel says, so tell me this. After looking at all the evidence, and what I think is crystal clear, if you didn't kill Travis, then who did? Jodi says, he was private about a lot of aspects of his life. Rachel says, Jodi says, he told me some things I got from some of his, Facebook accounts, emails, or MySpace, or whatever, because I have passwords to those. But I don't know, he would get solicitations, but he would always respond not to not answer the solicitation, but to call the person out. And I don't know if anything ever became of those. I don't know. I mean, I know his tires were slashed. I don't know. Hold on one second. I just want to make sure that we're okay here. Okay. And then Rachel says, maybe you weren't the person that did it, but maybe you were just physically there when it happened and somebody else did it. I mean, I guess you know that's a possibility. If that's the case, help us out here. Help yourself out. I don't know what else to do for you, Jodi. I'm at the end of my rope. You're not going to get a lot of people that are trying to help you out along the way beyond this point. If you didn't do it, then who did? Because everything is pointing to you. Not just pointing to you, but screaming that Jodi killed Travis. And I thought that I could come in here and talk to you and talk some sense into you and get you to kind of help yourself out. You don't need to help our case out. You don't need to help their case out. That's a slam dunk. Jodi says, I know, he showed me. Rachel says, and what I'm hearing is someone who doesn't give a rap about what happened. I'm hearing somebody who is worried about money, your appearance, everything, and I don't hear anything about Travis unless you're specifically asked, how do you think that looks? Jodi says, listen, I don't care so much about... Rachel says, no, you listen. You are not grasping the reality here, Jodi. You're worried about wedding pictures, and all this other stuff is really insignificant. Jodi says, listen, my life is over. Travis's life is over. I'm sorry about Travis. I didn't take his life. Rachel says, all right, well, I guess I was wrong. Jodi says, the reason I cared about all those other things is because those people still have lives. I care about those people, and they don't know where their stuff is, I happen to be in a position with their stuff, and so... Rachel says, all I know is all of the innocent people that I've talked to that have been accused of a crime don't act the way you do. And you're acting like the person that I portrayed, the ugly, cold-blooded murderer. One of the actions that I portrayed, that is how you're acting. There is nothing in your actions that would indicate me to believe that you're a victim of circumstance. And you're going to be sorry, when we get down the road. And, Jodi says, I agree. And... Rachel says, you'll probably be very sorry you didn't do the right thing. You have the opportunity to do something right here. I don't know what else to tell you. Show me that I wasn't wrong, Jodi. Show me what's inside your heart and not what's on the exterior. Help me understand why it's happened, that it wasn't cold and calculated and planned, because that's how everything points right now. You owe that to at least Travis's family. Give them some closure, because I know from working with all these families that have lost loved ones that they are not struggling with who did it. They're struggling with why. Jodi says, that's what I've been struggling with. Rachel says, do you understand why you did it yourself, maybe? Is it something that it's part of you that came forth that you've never seen before? I know Travis's family is struggling with why, and that would be one thing that would give them closure. They may never like you, but I think that they would be appreciative of the way their son's life was, appreciative of why their son's life was taken. You can't give them their son back, but you can at least give them peace of mind as to why. I know if it was my child, that's what I would want to know. I know that you're not a mother, but all women who have those mothering instincts within them, and I think you can understand what I'm saying, and that's why you're hanging your head right now. Was I off base, Jodi? Jodi says, I can't imagine what it would be like to lose one of my brothers. And then Rachel says, wouldn't you want to know why you lost one of your brothers? Jodi says, yeah. Rachel says, I've never met them. I can't speak for them, but I would bet, my paycheck, that's what they're wondering right now, and you can at least show them you have a soul, that you have a heart, and that you understand that you need that you understand that need in them and do something for somebody else besides yourself. That's the least you can do for them right now. Give them an answer. Tell them why. That's how you can control something that is happening in your life right now, because you have the power. That's a gift you can give that family. Tell them why. Use me as the voice to tell them why. Jodi says, I just don't know why. Rachel says, did one thing lead to another and it got out of hand and it's unexplainable even in your mind, or did you have it all planned out? Was he roughing you up and you just couldn't take it anymore? Was he being violent on his part? Jodi says, he was only that way a couple of times. It was before I moved. I had bruises and stuff, and people were like, oh, is Travis beating you up? And we're like, ha, ha, ha. And he got mad, and I wore a short-sleeved shirt, and it was like 100 degrees out. So this isn't the picture-perfect relationship. Jodi says, no, it was very rocky. No, I've never once denied that we didn't have our challenges, that he's said several choice words to me that weren't nice, and but he's not the only person that's ever done that. My own father has done that. Other women and men have done that to me, and other boyfriends. Rachel says, but you didn't kill them. You didn't get pushed to the point where you couldn't take it anymore. That's what we're trying to understand is why. Either way, those detectives in Arizona have made their case, but the least you can do for that family is give them an answer. I'm not saying portray Travis as this ugly, horrible person, because I don't know if that's the right thing to do either, but at least let them know that it was maybe a two-way street. And it wasn't all your fault, or like I said, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you did plan it from day one and carried it out. If his mom and dad were sitting here right now, what would you say to them? Jodi takes a really long pause, and then she's crying. I would tell them I'm very sorry. Other than Travis, I've never lost anyone close to me. And then Rachel says, if they asked you why it happened, what would you say to them? I don't have the answer to why. It's just, I don't know why he was killed. I don't know why. I don't know why. Rachel says, all right, maybe you can't understand why. What led up to it? But what would you say to them? Because that would help them out with the why. If you're struggling with the why you're within yourself, then what led up to it? How could you explain to his mom and dad what led up to it? That would help them to understand. I'm sorry. Rachel says, are you saying to me, are you saying that to me or to his family? Jodi says, to everybody. To everybody, to his family, to my family, to Travis, to God. Rachel says, then if you're truly sorry, Jodi, clear your conscience and give them an understanding of what led up to it. Don't paint yourself as the cold-blooded person that they'll be left with unless you give them an understanding. Jodi's crying again. I don't want to believe that I was wrong about you. Jodi put her head down on the table and is crying. And she says, could you get me a Kleenex I can use? Rachel says, sure, I'll be right back. Jodi takes a drink of water, puts her head down on the table again and cries. Rachel comes back, hands Jodi a roll of toilet paper. Jodi says, thank you. Rachel says, that's all we have. Jodi blows her nose. Rachel says, I can see that your tears are real. There's obviously is nothing that you can fake. Jodi says, Travis told me that my tears mean nothing. He said that one time when we were fighting. Rachel says, how'd that make you feel? Jodi says, well, I knew they were real, so that's all that mattered. It just made me, I don't know. It was weird. Because he just seemed to have no emotional understanding or depth, and then other times he could move himself to cry like... She snaps her fingers. If he wanted to, or if he was on stage and it if he felt the speech or whatever, but those were things that he felt deeply about, So we're all different. We all express our emotions differently, and I realized that. Rachel says, did he know how to push your buttons? Jodi said, we knew how to push each other's buttons. I could make him mad in 5 seconds. That's not my favorite pastime or anything, but I just knew how to do it. And he knew how to make me cry in 5 seconds, so I think his emotional expression was anger and mine was just sadness, I guess. Rachel said, is that what happened? Did he push your buttons or you push his buttons? Is that what triggered this whole thing? Because looking at the pictures, it looked like, you guys were engaged in some sort of intimate moment between the two of you. It didn't look like it was all going bad. It looked like, something happened real quick, and that's the understanding I was talking about that you could give to the family. Jodi says, I just don't know. Rachel says, well, maybe you don't know why, and I understand, that's a pretty deep philosophical thing you'll be struggling within yourself, and I'm guessing, but the factual things that led up to it, and then people can draw their own conclusions from there, but sitting there silent and not saying anything makes you look like a horrible person. Jodi's holding toilet paper in her hand. She's blowing her nose. She raised her hands and covers her eyes while she's still clutching at the toilet paper. Rachel says, obviously, you've had other relationships with, ups, downs. That never drove you to the point. Jodi says they were far worse than Travis. Rachel says, so what was it? What was it with Travis that set you off to such a degree? Jodi appears to be crying, puts her hands on her face again, still clutching the toilet paper. Rachel says, I understand that you're a very private person. Everyone has said that. It's glaringly apparent, but all of your business is going to be right out in the open, so there's really nothing to hide anymore. You know what I mean. Jodi says, I wasn't as private as Travis. Rachel says, are you worried about his reputation? Jodi says, Rachel says, is that what you're trying to protect here? Jodi says, yeah, I'm concerned. I would rather everyone didn't know that he was, that we were both violating certain chastity laws continually. That's a very big deal in the church. I know his bishop knows, but he keeps everything private. And I don't know if you're familiar with our faith, but Travis, has another bishop, and in the next life, he's working through those things. So he's got his own path. I don't want his family. I don't know. I don't think his family share his faith, or if they do, they're not as involved deeply as he was. So I don't know how they would feel. I'm sure they don't care. They just want to know why. I can't imagine what they're going through right now. Rachel says, at least on some level you can understand what's going on in their heads, That's why we have been talking here. Was this a situation where you guys were involved in an intimate exchange and things got too rough? Is that what happened? Is that why the secrecy and privacy with me today? Jodi says, no. Rachel says, then what's keeping you from unloading this burden? Your burden. Is it your own pride? Do you think at this point your pride matters more than Travis's? More than his family's grief? What if they don't have a faith base like Travis did? And what if they don't have the spirituality to fall back on to help them through this process? Some people can deal with it better than others when they have their own spiritual roots and they can dig down and hold on to. What if they don't have that? What if they're in more turmoil than somebody who did have a faith base? Wouldn't you want to help them out? You tell me that you're sorry. Jodi says, if I could, I'd help them out in a heartbeat. Well, says Rachel, you can't bring them back, but you can help them understand. And no matter what, it's not going to change their love for their son. It's not going to make them dislike their son no matter what happened, but at least they'll have closure. At least they'll have closure, she says again. If you're not going to do it for yourself, at least do it for them. If you've already resigned to the fact that your situation's hopeless, why wouldn't you do that for them? Jodi says, can I use the restroom? Rachel says, sure, you understand that I have to go in there with you. Jodi says, yes, that's fine. Female officer says, okay. Jodi tosses her used toilet paper into the trash can behind her, stands up, and then walks out the door to the restroom with Rachel. Jodi and Rachel return, sit down. Rachel says, so before we took a break, I posed a question to you that you felt was a good question. In your situation, if you see your situation is so helpless, why wouldn't you at least give the family some closure and some peace of mind as to what happened or why? If you have any feelings, emotions within you, any goodness in your heart, I don't know why you wouldn't do that. Because if you don't, and you don't give them any information, and they seek for closure, that makes you a very selfish person. Jodi says, I think I've been pretty selfish. Rachel says, how have you been selfish? Jodi says, it's just a lot of things. Travis was always so selfless. He gave me everything that I needed. If I needed money, he had it. It was mine. If I needed food, if I needed to borrow his car, to use the internet because mine was down, if I wanted to borrow his books, he had a cool library on audiobooks, and one time he helped me with my prepaid legal business, and he doesn't have a monetary benefit in it, at least, and I would help him too with that, because you have to qualify for this position. There's a monthly qualification, and I would just help him with computer stuff, and I think I'm selfish. And one time we just met in Ehrenberg, and when I went to Southern California, so we could just rent a hotel room and make out the whole weekend and whatever, but we drove to go see a movie, and there was this lady, Jodi's crying, standing on the side, and he pulled over in his BMW. He rolls down his window and he says, are you hungry? And she says, yeah. So we turned around, we went to Wendy's right next to the hotel, and he got her this triple-decker and biggie fries, or whatever it's called, and the biggest drink they had, and he gave it to her, and Jodi's crying. He always did stuff like that. We pulled into the gas station once in Arizona and saw this Navajo Indian, and nothing against that tribe, but they've got a very rich culture, but Navajos that you meet there are just really overweight, but their animals are starving with their ribs sticking out, and it's just made us feel so bad. So Travis, well, we ended up splitting it, but Travis bought 7 cheeseburgers for 3 hungry dogs, and one was a mother with puppies, and they just woofed them down. We felt better, but we just felt like we couldn't do enough. Rachel says, then where did things go wrong, Jodi? She says, I don't know. Rachel says, this is your chance to make at least something right, even if you did it on a small scale. It would be a big deal to his folks. Jodi says, do they already know I'm in custody? Rachel says, I'm sure they do. Jodi says, well, they'll feel much better about that. Rachel says, but they still need closure. I mean, just because you're in custody doesn't give them any closure. Is this something that you had planned from day one? Is this something you wish you could take back? Jodi says, I wish I could change it. I wish I could rewind the clock. Rachel says, what would you do if you rewound the clock? Jodi says, well, I would have done everything I could to prevent it. Rachel says, if your fate is inevitable in your mind, why wouldn't you just give the family closure? Jodi says, I don't know why. I don't know if I can give them what they want. I just don't know. Rachel says, wouldn't you at least want to try to let them make that decision? If it were my son, I would want the information so that I could make some sense of it. Is this something that is so horrific in your mind that you don't want to think that you'd be capable of such a thing? Because that's the person that I was talking about. The person is scared and remorseful and didn't want any of this to happen, so I don't think I was wrong, Jodi. This is your opportunity to make it right on some of your selfishness and let the family decide how they're going to deal with the information and how they're going to use it. And why should there be any more suffering than they've already had? In your religion, and forgive me for my ignorance about it, Jodi says, that's okay, it's a Christian-based religion. Rachel says, do you believe that the truth shall set you free? And Jodi says, I think, yeah, because it has to do with And then Rachel says, and if it's just a Christian-based theology, then I would say they would. Jodi says, I think it even says that in the Doctrine of Covenants, that, which is another part of our scriptures, and I'm trying to remember if I just read that the other day. Rachel says, have you been giving much thought to that? And Jodi says, not within the last 24 hours. I haven't been really giving much thought to anything except... Rachel says, you are the only person that has a lot of information that the family seeks. They don't seek you. You know, crime scene information. They will already have that. They seek something. Jodi lets out a cry. Rachel says, that is on a much deeper level. It's on an emotional level, and you're the only one, the only person that can help them out with that. I think we might have to stop there because it's almost 1 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock we have the knitting, and I have some things I've got to take care of. But I don't know how long we've been going here. Hopefully that you guys are okay with that, but I'm going to get off here. Hi to everybody that came in. Hi, Kevin Leonard. Thanks to the moderators. Hi, Elizabeth T. Hi, Webkins Mom. I've been looking for you. Hope you're okay. It's different when I see people at different times during the day, isn't it? Let me see who's here and say hello. Oh, it's on Top Chat instead of Live Chat. 1 second. I hope that whoever's coming to the knitting is coming. Remembers it's at 3 o'clock. And if you're not in Slack and you need an invitation, please make sure you email me because I'm not going to remember if you told me days ago, okay? Hi, Cup of Stars. Oh, Cup of Stars, I got your crochet pictures. They're very nice. Maybe I'll show them today during the knitting if possible, okay? Hi, Dare to Be Different. I haven't seen you in a while. Hi, Elizabeth T. Irene, Leslie Romani, Pamela. Hey, the Pink Dahlia. I've been looking for you. I'm glad to see you. See, I see different people now during the day. That's good. Hope everything's all right with you. Easily distracted. Everybody, 80s girl. You'll be on the replay crew, unfortunately. You know what? It's probably going to be going on a long time, Elizabeth T. Don't be so sure. How's everything been in here? I thought I saw Kevin Leonard, but it's not Kevin Leonard. It was saying Kevin Leonard's the top #1 chatter. There were no wrenches in here? I think Nana Patty was here early on, right? How's it been? And were there any trolls? You still need to contact It's Pink. I gave her your information. I gave it to her, Irene. Maybe, well, you know, we can get things sorted out. I don't know. You're welcome, 80s girl. Yeah, look for us later, Elizabeth. I'm sure we'll be here. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Everyone is misbehaving? Everyone's been fine? Oh, there's Nana Patty. I thought I saw you here. Okay, thank you. Whenever you want to share that. You're welcome. One Cup of Stars. Alright, so I'll see you guys a little later. Hi, the Pink Dahlia. Leslie just said that because I was a new customer, but I can only assume that you want to make sure I'm not a scammer. I thought you are kidding. Ever heard of someone? What happened, Pink Dahlia? I was pretty surprised. I thought, what a way to get a new customer. What happened, Pink Dahlia? Has anyone seen Kelly B or Adventures? Yeah, they're in here all the time. You can't reach them by email? What happened? Okay, I'm back, Leslie. I just sent it to you, but do it when you feel like. Don't feel like you have to leave here and do it now. Oh, something about the sales? You're still trying to get your sales wrapped up there, Pink Dahlia? Because I went to bed really early, Teresa Lily. Well, really early. Oh my gosh, really early. It's like 3 something, okay? But I literally could not. I felt bad last night because I feel like I just started reading stuff and I could not read anymore. I was literally falling asleep. And I went up to bed. I couldn't fall asleep right away, but then I got up super early and all I could think about was decoupaging those oyster shells. And I came down and I worked on that for like 1.5 to 2 hours. And then it was like 9 o'clock and I was like, okay. It was like, and I just said, you know what? Maybe I'll read something from Jodi Arias since maybe I won't be tired. And I know that after the knitting, I'm going to be too tired to be doing a lot of reading. So it worked out well, I think. I hope so. Oh, you were here the whole time? Hi, Mama Ames. You've never used PayPal ever before this, Pink Dahlia, so that's why I guess they give you a choice saying whether it's for... Why don't you just send a money request, Pink Dahlia? Just go on the top where it says request money, put their email address in there, and in the notes, put what it's for. Like bracelet, $20, plus shipping, whatever that is, total price, and then request that money from that person. That's the way it's easiest to do that. Not money transfer, just a money request. Thanks, Teresa Lily. All right. But I'm going to go because we're going to be back, my gosh, in like 2 hours. Okay. So hopefully I'll see you guys in 2 hours. But I'm going to go and take care of some things, okay? Everybody have a really good day until we see you again at 3. All right. Stay safe. Talk to you later. Why is who's ringing my watch? Okay. I don't know. Somebody's ringing my watch. Hey, Janaean. Thank you for spending it. Hi, Moo. You were here too, lurking? Hi, everybody's coming out. Okay. Hi to all the lurkers. Hi, Mark. Okay. See you at 3. Hi, Lucy J. Everybody's coming out now. Come out, wherever you are. Hi, Chelsea. All right, see you there, guys. You're welcome, Chelsea. Bye, everybody. Let me see how I can end this, and that.